Council. I'm Adam Costa. I'm an attorney with the firm of Mead, Tallerman and Costa with an office at 30 Green Street. My partner Lisa Mead is here with me tonight. I'm representing the Institution for Savings and would like to introduce the others who are present with me tonight as well, all of whom may need to address the board at some point in response to any comments or questions you might have. First and foremost, Mike Jones is here present. He's the president and CEO of the Institution for Savings. Kim Rock, the vice president and COO for the Institution for Savings, is here as well. Christopher Angelakis with Architectural Resources Cambridge, who provided many of the plans that are in your package of information submitted in advance of tonight's remand hearing, is present with us tonight as well. And then Nicholas Betts, who's behind me here, who's the landscape architect, again, prepared at least one of the plans in your package, also available to address any comments or questions that the board members might have. What I thought I would do tonight in terms of sequencing the presentation, consistent with what the chair indicated, is first try and provide some background to the board, not necessarily because the background is what you're being asked to vote upon tonight, but I think that the context is important to understand how we got here. It's important for those of you who were members of this board when you voted on these two applications a year and a half ago, but it's also important for those of you who were not members of this board a year and a half ago and didn't have the opportunity to attend 16 or so months of public hearings and solicit information from the applicant and receive comments from members of the public. So to assist with that, and I thank Mr. Port for placing it on the screen, and I know that he'll sort of zoom in, so some of these words are legible, but we've got just a timeline of events here starting in January of 2020. And again, this is the process that those of you who were board members 2 years ago were familiar with and are familiar with. But we originally submitted our applications for this proposal for an addition to the Institution for Savings headquarters in downtown Newburyport in January of 2020. Two applications, one for a special permit in the downtown overlay district and the other one for site plan review, which of course is triggered by the nature of the proposal. We engaged in a process over the ensuing year plus, approximately 14 to 16 months, where we attended a series of public hearings. We received feedback from board members. To be candid, and I don't think anybody in this room will necessarily disagree with me, there was some inconsistency in that feedback, as is often the case with municipal boards and certainly boards of your size, where different members have different perspectives on what is appropriate or inappropriate for a site. Same thing with respect to members of the public, neighbors, and so forth. And so you can see here, as illustrated on the screen, that we provided to the board a series of what I would call at least probably 5 of the 6 substantial reworkings of the site. Adjustments to the aesthetic of the site, adjustments to massing and height and architectural details in an effort to try and address what we had heard at the previous meeting as being the chief concerns of the board. In some of those instances, we were simply restructuring the proposal, but maintaining the same architectural design overall. In other instances, and I think it was specifically the 3rd revision in October of 2020, we went with an entirely different look for the site, where we were trying more to mimic some of the adjacent residential neighborhood as opposed to the non-residential or institutional nature of the site as it exists today. I'm not going to get into all those particulars, each of the 6 revisions. It's not relevant to what's before you tonight. I know we talked about the remand order and some of the language speaking to reconsideration, but the reality is, whether you read the remand order or the settlement agreement, the reason that this has been brought back before you, and your chair can attest to this because she was present at the mediation that I'm going to speak about in a moment, but the reason this is being brought back before you tonight is to consider a series of 5 changes that I'm going to describe in some detail, and to determine whether those 5 changes satisfy the concerns that the board previously had, and put you in a position as a planning board to determine that this project meets the requirements of the downtown overlay district and meets your requirements for site plan approval. But in any event, if you have questions about those 6 revisions, you can look to our May 18th correspondence. We went through in some limited detail, but over the course of, I think, some 6 or 7 pages, each of the various plans. We actually included snippets from those plans within the text of our narrative to provide you with just a glimpse of what was put before the board at each of those several meetings. In March of 2021, and you see this on the right side now on the left side of your screen, the board issued 2 decisions denying both site plan approval and the special permit. The institution exercised its statutory right to file an appeal of those decisions with the land court. We filed that appeal within the appeal timeframe in the month of April 2021. As is often the case in the land court, the judge convenes what's called the case management conference, brings the parties together to discuss the logistics of the case and whether there's any potential for resolution. At that conference, which was conducted in June of 2021, the judge had some strong words, frankly, for both parties about the reality that they ought to be able to talk through this and attempt to work out their differences. And so following up on the judge's remarks and recommendations, I engaged in conversations initially with Attorney Lane, and then through Attorney Lane with the city council and the board to propose mediation. And the city council agreed to mediation in August of 2021. They met. My understanding is that that was a meeting in executive session. They voted to support the concept of mediation, understanding certain parameters that we had set forth. We had indicated at that time that based upon the changes we had already made through the course of the planning board public hearing process, and based upon the programmatic needs for this site, the utility of adding an addition onto the site to serve the institution for savings needs, we weren't going to reduce the overall square footage of the addition, and we weren't going to reduce the number of parking spaces. Originally, and again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but originally we had proposed offsite parking, and we required an additional special permit for that offsite parking. We were able to, at expense to the bank, we were able to incorporate into the proposal before the board this concept of stacked parking, something that's relatively new in Massachusetts, but is being used in more congested, more urban, more downtown areas to provide for greater parking on a smaller footprint. And so we incorporated that into the project. We indicated that we needed every one of those parking spaces. We weren't seeking any relief for parking. And so as part of the mediation process, we weren't going to reduce parking. Based on those parameters, the city council endorsed and supported the concept of mediation. So we entered into a mediation session, actually 2 sessions that were conducted, as you can see here, in September and October of 2021. We had a retired judge that presided over those sessions. Present at those sessions were your current chair and a former member of the planning board, the former city council president and the now current city council president, then the vice president of the council. Attorney Lane and Attorney Eichman were present. I was present. Attorney Mead was present. Representatives of the bank that are here tonight were present. The then mayor of the city was present. The clerk was present, and the planning director was present. We had many individuals that were involved in the mediation. It went all day during our first session in September, and it went part of the day during a second session in October. As a result of that mediation, and let me say part of the reason for going 2 sessions, aside from just the length of the mediation, was that there were requests made of us after that first session to, for lack of a better phrase, go back to the drawing board with respect to certain components of our proposal, certain architectural details that frankly couldn't be determined on the spot. It's very difficult for architects, engineers to provide answers on the spot without running proposals through their systems, analyzing effects on things like stormwater and overall civil design of the site. And so the purpose of this multi-session mediation was to try and address some of those concerns. A mediation settlement agreement, the contingent agreement you heard referred to earlier, was signed in October at the second session of mediation. And that contemplated a remand back to the planning board for the planning board to consider a series of 5 changes to the site that we thought, and at least the representatives of the city that were present at that mediation thought, by virtue of signing the agreement, would satisfy the planning board. It was a contingent remand. It required a vote of the city council to allow it to come back before the planning board. To our surprise, the city council rejected that settlement in November of 2021. There was some concern about process. There was some concern about the matter coming back before the planning board. The council voted to reject the settlement. Land court case proceeded. In fact, we had a status conference later in November or early December of 2021. The judge expressed disappointment that the parties were not able to reach a consensus. Again, I think it's fair to say this, it was a public session of the court. He admonished the parties, indicating that it shouldn't have been subject to city council approval from the judge's perspective, but nevertheless established deadlines for summary judgment to resolve the issues in the case. We were then contacted by the city expressing an interest in revisiting the proposal that had been put forward previously. As a consequence of that contact, we entered into discussions again, the parties through respective counsel, and we requested of the court, once again, we went back to the city council approved the remand in April of 2022, I guess the month before last. And last month in May, the remand was renewed. The land court issued a renewed remand order allowing us to come back before the board. So I've thrown a lot at you in terms of process and procedure, but I think it's important to understand, number one, the process that has been undertaken over the course of 2 years, even irrespective of the litigation. I've been to many of these meetings myself. I wasn't involved in the original permitting, Attorney Mead was, but I've been involved in these remand discussions and several of these public meetings before the city council and the city council subcommittee. I've heard it stated by residents, neighbors, other members of the public that concessions haven't been made by the bank. They're certainly entitled to their opinion, and they'll provide you those opinions tonight. I'm certain of it. I think that the proof is in the pudding. I think that this graphic you have before you, if you zoom back out on it, you see the full process over the course of 2 years, separate revisions to this site plan. I think that tells a different story. I think that tells a story that the institution has worked with the planning board in an attempt to address the concerns. Is that enough? Well, that's going to be the question that's before you when this process, when this remand process ends. I want to turn to my correspondence now, if I could, unless there are any questions about the process and procedure with regard to the remand. Okay. So if you look back to my May 18th correspondence that addresses the history that I just described, but also the proposals, I want to talk first about some of the objective standards that apply to this proposal. And again, this is a bit of a recap, but I think it's important for the members of the board who were not members of the board 2 years ago when this process was last before you, particularly in light of the site visit that just occurred at 5:00 p.m. tonight. And some of the questions that I heard asked, discussions between board members about what was seen on site, comments made by a couple of neighbors relative to height and setbacks. I think it's important to recognize what we're dealing with in terms of the B2 district, which is the underlying district in which the institution is located and in which its proposed addition will be located. So if you turn to page 2 of my correspondence, and you don't have to have it before you, but I'm going to refer to it. We have 2 graphics on the second page of our correspondence. And the first one shows the dimensional and density standards that are applicable in the B2 zoning district. The second one shows gross floor area through the different iterations of the proposal. And so I'm not going to go through each row or each column of this. Thank you, Andy. Through each row or each column of this chart, but you can see here, maybe most important, we have the required dimensional standards at the very top, second row, and we have the remand plan at the bottom. And in fact, in between, we have the January 6, 2020 submittal, which was our original submittal. As you would expect, lot area and frontage have not changed. We're dealing with the same site. But it's important to note that in this district, there is a 0-foot front yard setback from Prospect. That's where the front yard setback is measured for the site. There is a 0-foot left side setback that will be measured from Otis. There is a 0-foot rear yard setback. There is a 100% permissible lot coverage, and there is a 40-foot height limitation. Now, I recognize that these are not the same requirements that apply in residential districts, but they are the requirements that apply to this particular site. And so if you look at the January 6th proposal, which was our initial submittal to this board, and it's clear even from the graphics that are contained in the correspondence, it was a more sizable structure, a more sizable addition. You can see that the front setback was 4.2 feet. We actually have a correction here. We listed to our own detriment that the remand plan was 3.8 feet. We mismeasured. It's between 4.1 and 4.5 feet. So it's right in the vicinity of the 4.2 feet that the original submittal showed. Again, there's a 0-foot front yard setback, but nevertheless, we're in the same vicinity as where we were before. The original proposal had a setback from Otis of 4.5 feet. We provided additional green space in that location as part of the remand plan. In fact, we had done so through the course of the revisions that were made when this was before the planning board originally. So that setback, the left side setback from Otis Place, is between 9.6 feet and 24.4 feet. And again, that can be seen on the plans. Rear yard setback, 5.5 feet in the original proposal, now varies between 4.9 feet and 4.9 feet and 7 feet 4 inches, I think is what that's supposed to say. And then lot coverage, 100% is the requirement, is the maximum. It's the entirety of the site can be covered in the B2 district. Our original proposal was at 40%. We've reduced it down to 38% in the latest iteration of the plan. And then height, and we'll talk more about this as we look at the plans, because this was a topic, of course, if maybe the chief topic during the mediation process. The requirement is maximum of 40 feet. We had heights between 31 feet 3 inches and 25 feet 1.5 inches, and you can see some of the asterisks indicated that that's because the design roof had 2 levels, and we measured to the top of the highest copper cornice, and the top of the lowest section of the addition along Prospect Street was that 25-foot 1.5 inch measurement. The remand plan has a 28-foot 11-inch height, and again, that measurement is the mean roof height, which you can see per the asterisk. It's just off the page there at the bottom, but that's what that indicates. So I think it's important to understand that we are within the confines of what the district allows. It's simply a question of consistency with the downtown overlay district. If we scroll down on the page a bit, we can see also gross floor area, and this is important. So originally, the January 6th proposal had a gross floor area as measured for parking calculation of 7,437 square feet. The remand plan reduced that to 6,512 square feet. Parking required was 59 spaces originally. We're down to 58 based upon that reduced square footage. We originally were providing only 30 spaces on site, but as I had mentioned, we were able to move all of the parking on site through the stacked parking concept, and now we're providing 62 spaces in excess of the required parking just by a few spaces by virtue of the remand plan, the same as what was provided by the last iteration that was presented on March 10th. So I think it was important just to understand these basic parameters of the B2 district before we move into the more subjective criteria of the downtown overlay district. Having said that, if you look to the latter part of our correspondence, again, I'm referring to our May 18th letter, we have a section entitled Proposal on Remand. And I don't know whether Mr. Port wants to show that or not, but I'm just going to simply follow along with the 5 changes that were negotiated through the mediation session and that have become a part of the submittal. Essentially, what is before you as part of this public hearing? These are the issues. So number 1, this is the first commitment that the Institution for Savings made during the mediation. We have proposed a lowering of the addition's cornice height, as well as a continuance of that cornice height through the connector, which is the area that connects the existing building to the proposed addition, replacing the exterior treatment above the cornice with copper. This gives the appearance of lower height. It doesn't physically reduce the height further than the reductions that were made during the public hearing process. Again, we did reduce it from what was originally proposed, but we had made that commitment again prior to, and it was a condition of mediation, that we would not be able to reduce the square footage of the structure, and we can't reduce the height of the connector because of the particulars of the site, the elevation of the site, and where the existing building will connect to the proposed addition. However, we can make some adjustments to the architectural details to provide for the appearance of a lower height through the adjustment of this cornice. And we went several rounds through mediation in discussing what was possible, and you'll see some of what we proposed and even some options that are presented for the planning board to consider as part of this process. The second item that we proposed is along the addition's Prospect Street facade. I heard a comment made during the site visit today that it's going to give you a tunnel effect as you're standing on Prospect. I don't know that I concur with that entirely. Certainly there is going to be additional construction in a location that doesn't currently have construction. That's the reality of it. I heard comments made about visibility. You won't be able to see the houses, the structures on Otis Place. You won't be able to see portions of State Street from Otis Place. I mean, that's the reality of constructing any sort of improvement in a location that doesn't currently have an improvement, in a location that is currently a parking area. But with respect to the Central Bay, there was a concern that indeed there was going to be this blank facade, this massing that occurred along one side of Prospect Street that was inconsistent maybe with the streetscape on the opposite side, where you've got a number of sizable homes, but of course those homes are broken up because they're individual homes, and in some cases they're broken up by individual driveways. So there was a desire to provide a greater appearance of lack of continuity between a single mass structure along that facade. So what was proposed here is the Central Bay, the central area of that addition, being given a recessed appearance by extending the sides out approximately 18 inches. So they're extended out 18 inches, and there's an 18-inch dip in the middle. And again, we'll show some renderings that we prepared between the first and second sessions of the mediation. to help illustrate that to those who participated in the mediation and satisfy them that that achieved their desired result. The third change or third commitment that was made by the institution was that the facade of the addition would utilize a brick that is different in color variation from the 1980s edition to distinguish it visually, so that it wouldn't appear, again, to provide a breakup of that massing appearance, give it a different visual effect. And you're all members of a planning board, you've got planning expertise, you understand what was trying to be achieved here. I think that, again, when you see the illustrations, the renderings, you'll get a better sense as to what we were able to achieve. However, the brick facade of the connector would be consistent with the brick of the 1980 edition, so there wouldn't be a hard stop between those two components of what will ultimately become one building. Number 4, there was a concern that was raised by a couple, maybe more than a couple, city representatives during the mediation session, that there would be glare light that would shine through the first floor windows, particularly on the Prospect Street side, as these windows face residential structures on the opposite side of Prospect Street. We explained, of course, on the opposite side of those windows are vehicles, because this is the area that has the stack parking. So there was a concern that you would have vehicle headlights or taillights or whatnot shining through these windows. Based upon the design of the structure, and again, our consultants can probably speak to this, certainly speak to this better than I can. But based upon the design and the elevation, we didn't have the concern that that would occur, but we understood that it was a concern nonetheless. And so what we proposed was that those windows, those first floor on-grade windows on the Prospect Street facade, notwithstanding the fact that they will be also screened by landscaping, and we'll talk about that in a moment, would be comprised of spandrel glass, which is an opaque style glass. And I think we provided you at some point during this process, we delivered a sample of the spandrel glass to City Hall so you could see what it looks like. You may already be familiar with the concept of it, but the idea is that it doesn't allow for that passage of light, that those headlights to glare and light spill from one side of the window onto the other side, so that it would be affecting adjacent residences. Number 5, there was a desire to, again, for lack of a better term, beef up the landscaping, specifically along Prospect Street and Otis Street, with more dense plantings. And this was another topic that caused quite a bit of stir and discussion between those city representatives who were in attendance at the mediation, and between them and us as bank representatives. But ultimately, the desire was that we propose some form of a landscape plan that was more dense than what was proposed originally, that provided for a planting bed, so to speak, between the sidewalk and the side of the structure, the proposed addition, and also that be distinguished by elevating that planting bed from the grade of the adjacent sidewalk. And the request was, we went back and forth about whether it ought to be just a couple of inches, whether it ought to be elevated at all, or whether it should be as many as 12 inches, a foot higher than the adjacent sidewalk. And the number that was decided upon as the appropriate spacing was that elevated planting bed would be approximately 6 inches above the grade of the sidewalk. And so we hadn't prepared, because of course we didn't have sufficient time to do so between 2 mediation sessions a week and a half apart. We hadn't prepared a new landscaping concept, but we have since prepared it, and we submitted those landscaping plans as part of the materials that we provided to the board in advance of tonight's public hearing. So these are the 5 components of the proposal that is now before you. What I'd like to do briefly, and I'm going to enlist the assistance to the extent that the board has questions of Chris and or Nick as you look at these plans. I'd like to just briefly walk through the 3, I guess, groupings of plans, site plans, renderings, and landscape plans, to refer to some of the issues, topics that I've just summarized. So if, Andy, you can choose what you want, when you'd like to start with. Plan views are fine. So these plan views were more for informational purposes, again, to refresh the recollection of board members who may not recall with great detail what was before you a year and a half or 2 years ago, but also to assist board members who were not members of the board at that time. So this is, and those of you who attended the site walk, we provided a plan, and I'll enter that into the record before I finish. We provided a plan that generally showed the footprint of the addition. This is slightly different than that plan because it shows specific design for this this elevation of the plan. But you can go through each of the plans to the extent you have questions. You can see the setbacks from the adjacent roadways. You can see how on the right side of the plan, we've increased the setback from what was originally proposed from Otis Place in an effort to provide for additional green space and a bit of a buffer from the residences that are located along that roadway. Want to go to the next plan, Andy? This is the same footprint. This is just the second floor plan as opposed to the first floor parking plan. This shows the location, the interior layout, something that's not necessarily in the board's purview, but I know boards are often curious about what interior layout is proposed. And so we provided these floor plans for your information. Next. Okay, so now we have the elevation and section views. These are not as helpful necessarily as the renderings will be because they're two-dimensional, but they give you a sense as to what is proposed from the different locations, different angles viewing the site. You can see here from each of the sides of the site, you can see in sort of a lighter shade of gray, the existing bank building, the historic bank building, the original 1903 edition, the 1980s edition, and then everything that's in the darker coloring is the proposed addition that is now before you and that was before you a couple of years ago. You'll see that yes, the height of the proposed addition is elevated as compared to the 1980s edition, let's say, but not necessarily as compared to the original structure, which is higher in elevation that fronts on State Street. Next slide, Andy. Oh, I'm sorry, did you go? There you go. So it's just a different view from two opposite angles of the site. Next. You can see the garage entrance here. Garage is probably not the right term, the parking entrance to the underground or on-grade stacked parking. Depressed a bit in terms of its location, not underground per se, but that's the entrance that will be off of the parking area or circular turnaround within the site that exists today. Again, a question that I heard asked at the site visit was whether that portion of the layout of the site will remain the same. You can see on the plans that we provided during the site visit, which show the original or the existing island and the proposed island, that we're shifting it somewhat, but it's approximately in the same location. Existing parking between that turnaround and State Street will remain in the same location for the most part, and we're adding some landscaping as well. I think last slide, Andy. And that just gives you a visual of the stacked parking for those of you that are not familiar with the concept. But again, I know it's something that is becoming more commonplace, so maybe you are, but this is the stacked parking system. And we had submitted during the original public hearing process all the particulars as to how this system functions. So if we can proceed from here to the renderings, I think that those would be most helpful. Yes. Okay, so this is the proposal as viewed from State and Prospect Street. Again, if you were in the site walk, I don't know that we crossed over in this exact location, but we were on the corner, sort of on the right side of the plan here on the Institution for Savings site. This is the view. You can see the existing Institution for Savings Bank building on the right side. You can see the additions, including the 1980s addition, sort of in the center. And then you can see on the left, toward the left side of the plan, you can see the proposed addition that is now before the board. We've got overlaid here some existing vegetation or more fully grown vegetation. Some of the trees, as you saw on site today, are sizable and exist today. Others are smaller, but there is vegetation located along the Prospect Street facade between Prospect Street and the existing parking. Next slide. So this is as you're walking up or down, depending upon your perspective, Prospect Street away from State. You can see here the additional view.
Excuse me, sir. I don't know if you're aware that your volume is decreasing as you diminishing summers.
Understandably so, right? Understood. I'll try to speak louder. So this is just the view if you're walking down Prospect Street with State Street to your back. You can see up close, again, on the right side of the plan is the location of the addition, the existing addition on the site. And then you've got the connection to the proposed addition that is presently before the board. And you can see there sort of in the center, you've got the entrance to the parking area right where Mr. Port's cursor is. Again, just progressing down Prospect Street, just a different view of the site. You can see some of the, we're gonna zoom in on it in a moment because we're gonna provide some options, but you can see the treatment of the copper cornice that was referred to before. Thank you, Andy. You can see that that was adjusted from the original drawings to provide, especially with regard to that connector, a lower height because there's a significant copper portion there. We're going to provide some options as to how that could be treated. But these are the changes that we made through the mediation process to try and reduce the appearance of height of this structure, of this addition. Next slide, Andy. So this is the view as you're at the intersection of Prospect Street and Otis Place. So you've now essentially turned 180 to look back towards State Street. Otis is on your left, Prospect is straight ahead. And so now you're looking at sort of the, I'll call it the backside of the addition. I know that, again, referring to the site visit that occurred today, there were some comments about the existing stockade fence that's in that location running along Otis Place. You'll see that we've tried to open that area out. That was something that was not even negotiated during the mediation, but was negotiated and discussed during the 14, 16 months of public hearings before your board and historic commission. We opened that up to provide for additional green space and to provide for a greater setback from Otis. And it's a variable setback. It's not consistent because there is some variation in the building lines in that location along, albeit a distance from Otis Place. Next slide. So this is an important facade detail because it refers back to something I spoke about a moment ago, which was the 18-inch drop or setback in that central bay area, which is being outlined by Andy right now. And of course, we provided a difference in architectural detail and material as well to highlight that. The intent being, again, that we're breaking up the massing. Massing was a term that was used, that was referred to multiple times by the board during its public hearing process. It referred to in its ultimate decisions that it had concern with the massing of the structure. Massing is one of those vague terms. I've had occasion to litigate the issue of massing before. It's one of those vague terms that is difficult to define and often is not defined in the zoning context. So what one person views as massing, another may view as consistent with objective zoning standards. But I understand the concept of it, as I think all of you do, and those of us who were participants in the mediation understood that there was a concern about the walling in, the tunneling of Prospect Street and the desire to provide some articulation, fenestration along that facade along the side of Prospect Street. So we've inset that central bay by 18 inches by bumping out either side. You can also see in this plan, although it's again, this is only a rendering, so I would argue that the landscaping you'll see on the landscape plans is even more robust. But you can see the proposed area of landscaping along the front, or I guess I should say the side of the proposed addition between the facade of the building and the sidewalk, which is proposed to be a brick sidewalk. You can see in that location there is the 6-inch elevated planting bed that is going to have a variety of plantings that are anticipated to grow up and not to fully shield those first story on-grade windows, but to provide some shielding. Again, they're going to be spandrel glass, so you're not going to be concerned about light or glare, but there will be the additional benefit of landscaping alongside them. Next slide, Andy. So these are just some, I'll call them aerial renderings. In fact, that's what they're called, aerial northwest rendering that provides a overall view of the site and the environment, which I think is important. Is this an institutional site? Is this a sizable building? Yes, it is. But if you look at the surroundings along Prospect Street, along Otis Place, we believe that the adjustments we've made to the proposal is consistent with the general layout, not just of the downtown overlay district, of which it's a part, but with the neighborhood generally. And certainly it's going to be something new in the location where it's proposed, which is presently just a parking lot. But you can see here that we don't believe that the massing as adjusted, as reduced in overall footprint, is out of character with the overall neighborhood, even the immediately adjacent residential structures, as shown on this rendering from the northwest. Next slide. So these are your options, as I referred to before, concerning the copper paneling. And I had to go back and forth, and I'll ask Mr. Port to do it in a moment, because you almost have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, and back and forth to catch the nuance, which is focused on that copper panel right there at the top of the area we've referred to as the connector. And although it's not as easy to see when you're looking at it on the overhead as when you're looking at it on a more crystal clear, high resolution computer monitor in front of you, when you go through options 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're going to see that there are different options. This is a flat copper panel option, which essentially is just comprised of exactly that flat copper paneling in that location. When you go to option 2, these are raised panels of the window. So you can see that there's some division there, and there's a raising of the panels in the window locations. And again, Christopher Angelakis can address questions concerning that design if board members have questions. Option 3 has recessed panels of the windows. So slightly different from options 1 and 2. And then option 4 has what's called raised seams, which sort of highlights that division, vertical division between sections of the cornice, the copper treatment of the cornice area. So this is something that was discussed in more generic terms with the members of the representatives of the board, the representatives of the council, and others who participated in the mediation to try to get a sense as to what preferences would be. There wasn't really a consensus, and we couldn't do these designs on the spot. I think that this discussion really arose, quite frankly, during the second date of mediation, as opposed to during the first. So we committed to providing some options for the board to consider when we came back before your board on remand. I think that's the last of the slides here. So the only other plan we have, and the third set, or the third attachment I provided, are the landscaping plans. Give Andy a moment to find those.
Is that a separate?
No, it's in the plan set.
It's in the plan set, yeah.
Sorry. Right, so this, of course, is virtually impossible to see with great detail on the screen, but you can see as we zoom in. That's better. Thank you. So you can see, as described before, you've got the proposed building addition, which is identified on the site. It's white. You can see around it the area that is shown as the brick sidewalk, and then you can see the area between the brick sidewalk and the facade of the building, both along Prospect Street and along Otis Place. You can see the area in between. It's a strip of land on the Prospect Street side. It's a wider area because of that green space that was created on the Otis Place side. But we proposed a variety of landscaping there, comprised of trees and shrubs. You'll see the various codes. I know you're familiar with these sorts of plans. I guess I'm describing this as much for the benefit of the public as anything else, but you can see there are references to AG, KL, CA. These are codes that then coincide to the planting plan that identify the types and species of proposed plantings that will be located in these areas. The idea, of course, is to give them a variety of plants to provide year-round cover and the added benefit of landscaping along the side and adjacent to the proposed addition. And we provided on the right side of the plan, if you scroll over a bit, Andy, we provided just some examples of what some of these species would look like. Again, some of them are flowering and smaller, some of them are larger and more conical, but this is the mix that we are proposing for the site. And that's as much as I'm going to say about landscaping, because I'm not a landscape architect. I will allow our consultant, Nick Betts, to address that if you have further questions about landscaping. So I think I've spoken long enough. That in a nutshell is why we're back before you. I hope the history was helpful. I hope you understand the 5 topics that we're really here to discuss. I am hopeful that we're not going to get off on a tangent too much. I appreciate that newer board members may have some questions about the baseline submittal that was made back in 2020. Again, per the components of the settlement agreement, while this is back for you for reconsideration, it was really for consideration of the changes So I hope that the focus is on those changes, and we'll do our best to address any questions and comments. I purposely, as I said before, I've been through a number of these meetings with your city council, with council subcommittee, government relations subcommittee. I've heard the comments from the neighbors. I didn't want to spend my initial presentation to the board trying to rebut comments from neighbors that I know are going to be made. But I know I'll have an opportunity as we continue this discussion to address concerns that may be raised through this process. And obviously we'd appreciate the opportunity to do that at the appropriate time. As was mentioned by council, we talked during mediation about this being a one-night remand. That is fairly typical in my experience. This is not the first remand I've negotiated, or second, or third, or 12th. Remands to planning boards, zoning boards, when special permit denials are appealed, are typically one-night events. You negotiate a resolution, they come back, the board approves the resolution that was achieved in mediation. We recognize that this had been a more contentious project and that there had been significant input from residents of the community, from neighbors and others. And so, we do have an opportunity to continue this to a second night if the board feels that that's necessary, and to address any further concerns you might have that can't be addressed tonight at the next meeting. But, this does need to occur expeditiously because there is litigation that has effectively been stayed while the judge is awaiting this process playing out. And if this process is unsuccessful, which we hope it won't be, but if it's unsuccessful, then we continue to litigate, and we have deadlines for submittal of our dispositive motions, which are ready to go.
Okay, so
Thank you.
at this point, don't go anywhere because I want to see if there are any questions about the presentation for clarification from the planning board members. And if you feel like you need to bring in one or other member of your team, please feel free to do that. So I'll take comments from the board, questions. Alden, did you want to start?
Yeah, I just had a question. If you could give us a little more detail on the copper panel, is that in the connecting piece, is that a completely vertical piece that's not slanted in any way? It's completely vertical.
So I appreciate that the chair invited me to invite my consultant to speak, because, well, I can answer the question. I can't answer it with the expertise that Christopher can. So Chris, yeah, you want to speak to that?
Completely vertical.
Okay,
Yeah.
and just a little bit more, and the height of it, it's taller than the connecting piece on the new addition. Once you get to the new addition,
Yeah.
that section is a little bit lower than the copper panels on the connecting piece, is the way it looks there.
Yes, it is
Is that
taller
correct?
than the 1980s building cornice.
Yeah,
That's
I meant
correct.
on the other side, on the new building. Once the connecting piece gets to the new building itself.
So you can see that if you were to go back to the aerial, you can see what the geometry is. The
Right.
roof of that connector piece is consistent with the roof across the project, with the exception of the pitched roof areas. So that is all coplanar. So there is a line being shown there that is coplanar.
Right.
That's a model.
But there is a
There's-
section that's slanting down to the,
That is slanting down in one specific spot to sort of help break up more, we were challenged this whole project with how to manage massing. And so we took our shots where we could to manage things to have them feel lower and, have varying heights of cornices across the project, because that is the character of the neighborhood, that there are varying cornices that move up.
and within the different options that were mentioned in the four options, are there larger sections of the panel that were forward and back compared with the?
Yeah, so
just
it's following
raised
the,
joints?
it's following the, where we have divisions that push in and out, they're following the rhythm of the opening to the pier to the opening to the pier. So yeah, the panels you can see are either following they are matching up with sort of the width of the pier. Now that's all stuff that could be discussed. I mean, these are very, the options that were provided here were provided sort of on the fly during remand as things that we can talk about. There are further things that can be adjusted as the detailing of that go along. But these are the four kind of things that we thought were of the character of adjacent building. We went and kind of looked around. There are a number of copper elements in the direct neighborhood, and mostly they are very flat panel applications. Some of them have some battens included, and in this one we were just trying to say, well, if the board thought that the rhythm and geometry of the building really warranted having a little bit more sort of a push-pull effect of that particular fascia. That's also possible.
Thank you. And just one other part of that. So the roof on that section where the couple of panels are is flat
Yes,
and it's coming across, and then in the corners, there's a peak roof that
there
that
are
goes above the flat
there are
Yeah.
3 areas of
in the
roof
corners.
that, right.
Right.
Any other
Madam
questions?
Chair?
Yes,
Madam Chair, can you hear me? It's Richard.
yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I have a quick question, and Christopher, you might be the best one to answer this, but what feels like it's missing from the renderings in this aerial, is it fair to say that there's air handling equipment up on the roof and other mechanical equipment that presumably not being shown and would likely be on dunnage and also have screening, or what is their thinking?
Yeah, the pitched roof areas of the building are the screening for, I believe the systems that were being worked out in conceptual design were heat pump type mechanical systems. So there wouldn't be any large things on dunnage. The things that are on dunnage and are large are actually being planned to be in the, if you look at the right side of the rendering, there's a well that's associated with the 1980s edition. That area has been planned and been designed out already to back support all of those heat pumps. So all of the chiller water that's going to do heating and cooling will be run from that location. And the only thing that will be on the roof will be inside of those pitched roof forms. So we were trying to be as rigorous as possible about showing all the mechanical things that would be on the roof.
You can appreciate a concern. Yeah. No, thank you. You can appreciate we didn't want to have that surprise down the road.
I had a question also about the cornice. I thought I had heard or read that it was lowered. I remember from the settlement agreement.
Yeah, the corner from the previous schemes we had, the actual architectural element, which is the cornice, used to sit about 12 inches higher, and we actually dropped that cornice element down to, if you see the facade, that cornice element starts immediately after the head of the window, where we used to have 12 inches of lintel, and then the cornice started. So that all came down to help kind of, again, manage massing as much as we could. That was part of the things that we sat and sketched out together during remand.
Bob.
I think I'm going to ask you to come back up again.
We're gonna have to really speak.
I have a few questions that relate to the original proposal and then one question about the items for approval tonight. But I'm curious about the proposal for parking, the mechanized solution that is proposed for parking. And having worked on a couple of projects that included mechanized parking, I know that there is a component of arrival and queuing that happens as cars are processed in that mechanical system.
Mhm.
So with 62 cars arriving, and it becomes a more sensitive issue, I think, with office uses rather than residential uses when arrival and departure is spread out over a longer period of time. So with office uses, there tend to be peak moments when office workers are arriving in the morning, when they're leaving at night, and with 60 cars arriving in a fairly short period of time, are you concerned at all about queuing for those cars, about those cars backing up into the surface circulation on site, potentially backing up onto Prospect Street? So I wonder if you could address that.
Well, I will address it as much as I can. I am not designing this system, but I know what the components are to it, and I know what has been studied. So this exact issue has been studied. This particular system has actually quite minimal moving parts. So the time from the moment the car enters into there and finds a spot into the time the next car can find a spot is very, very short. This system only needs to move one spot to allow the car moves out of the way to allow the next car to come in. I don't, since I'm not the designer of that system, I can't give you all the data, but I think there's no concern. You want to speak to that?
And I appreciate having Attorney Mead here present tonight, because as I said, I wasn't a participant in the original proceedings before the board. But I do recall having reviewed this and preparing the complaint, quite honestly. There was a traffic analysis that was provided during the original review by the board that addressed this issue of queuing and looked to the proposed vehicle stacking solution to get all 62 spaces on site, and determined that there would not be significant queuing in the event that there was queuing, that queuing could be accommodated on site in that distance between the entrance to the site and the entrance to the actual spaces themselves. So I don't have that study here with me, because again, it was something that was originally part of the review by the board. But certainly if this matter gets continued, we can resubmit it. It would certainly be part of your records from the original
It'd be
submission.
worth looking at. Yes, thank you. Second question, I want to talk again about mechanical systems. I think you mentioned that the sloping roof elements provide screening. Can we go back, Andy, to the aerial view?
The mechanical systems that are going to be provided, the mechanical equipment that's provided would be within those slopes.
Inside the sloping
Yes.
roof elements,
Correct.
not on the flat roof.
They are not going to be
between.
on the flat roof, and so those slope roofs are not screening. They are a volume in which the mechanical equipment would be inside of.
So where does fresh air come in to the building? How do you get air into those units? You know,
Yeah,
the air
those are where the air, so the air handling units for that ventilation would be inside of those volumes. There will be louvers designed into those volumes to allow that to pass in, but it's nothing's going to sit outside of that volume.
So there are louvers as part of the sloping roof elements?
There will need to be, yeah. When we are looking at conceptually, we're placing them on the inside face, so they're never street facing.
Do you have any idea how large those louvers might be?
And not off the top of my head, I'm not the mechanical engineer.
One question about spandrel glass.
Mhm.
Which I think is kind of an unfriendly material at a pedestrian scale. I'm wondering if you considered any alternatives to that. For example, clear glass with a louver panel behind it. So there's a little bit of depth there. You might get a little bit of sense of light behind it, but it's not just a flat opaque surface in those windows. And did you think about any alternatives like that?
We have gone in previous iterations, we have gone even as far as to put a whole corridor behind there. What has happened over time is that there has been competing pressures for setback and competing pressures, on program. And where we are as of this point was that it's not just spandrel glass, but it's also the actual insulated wall and structure behind that too. So it's not,
So it's a shadow box detail, or is it?
it's not a shadow box detail because of the space we have right now. But what it is it has the components of the wall behind it. There's structural wall behind it. There's insulation behind it. So a lot of these things were done because there's much concern about not just light intrusion, but also sound intrusion. So we're providing an acoustical separation, we're providing a light separation with that wall. And so there was a great amount of pressure to make sure that this wall was as far back off the street as possible, which makes this wall a sort of, the depth it would take to have shadow box occur in that location was,
I mean, it looks like with the dimension you have in plan between the outside wall and the front of the cars that are parking, it looks like there's enough room there to create a little bit of
So you're
depth.
suggesting to pull the facades further out towards the
I'm not
street?
suggesting pulling the facade out. I'm suggesting that at the window opening,
Mhm.
you have the room to create more depth. So that you don't have that flat spandrel glass panel right at the sidewalk.
I hear you.
So
Yep.
I think there's room to do something like that. And I would encourage you to explore that kind of option. I think the last question I have is just about material and detail. The inset panel, which if I look at the elevations, it says it's a stone
Yes.
material. Can you be more specific about
I
what
think it's a
that
natural
material?
stone material, probably hung on clips.
It's a,
Or it's a natural stone material hung on clips.
is it a limestone? Is it a granite in your mind? Do
It is.
you have anything in
Yes,
mind specifically?
I think it is limestone, what we have talked about in mediation. I don't know if that's written down anywhere, but the limestone lintels, limestone inset, there's a granite base. So those are all natural stone materials that we're
Sure.
proposing.
But obviously the palette of materials and how they work together are important. So
Yes,
just
they are.
calling it generically stone doesn't give us all the information that we would like to have.
Okay. I hear you.
Lastly, just in terms of detailing, I mean, this is trying to look like a traditional masonry building. Are you respecting typical details like window setbacks? You know, are the windows recessed several inches from the face of masonry? Are you picking up on traditional brick detailing?
We are picking up on the brick detailing that's similar to the existing buildings on the site.
So
We
windows
have
are
not picked a window system, so we don't know what that setback is, but those windows will typically set back, and especially with the, we are contemporarily getting much deeper setbacks than we do in the past because we have to have a lot of insulation behind the brick for the,
This is real brick, right? This isn't a
This is
big
real
brick
brick.
system,
Yes.
it's real brick.
real brick. With a cavity behind it, with a lot of insulation behind it. So those setbacks will be more significant than maybe we would have been able to do 10 years ago. They will have to be like that.
Thank you.
Anyone else with the questions at this point on the board? All right, then we're going to move into public comment. The way this works, many of you have already been through this with us, so you understand the drill. I'd like you to, when you make your comment, begin with your name and your address clearly stated so that the note taker can get it. And limit your comments to 2 minutes. Do I have somebody who would do timing? Alden? Okay, great. And I'd also like to request that if someone has already said what you're planning to say, that you reference that and just quickly try not to say what you have to say without saying it in every detail as the previous speakers might have said. You know how much we appreciate what you have to say, and we use it in our, it very much influences our deliberations. And it'll help us stay focused and clear thinking if we can hear from you in the most efficient manner possible. So with that in mind, could I first of all see a show of hands of how many people would like to speak? Okay, so I'm not going to number you off. I'm just going to ask that you sort of form some sort of a line over here so you can just come through. You don't want to stand the whole time. You can get in line at a certain point. We'll start over here with Ann Gardner. I happen to know her because she is a previous board member. And I will give her the honor of being the first speaker. But then after that, if you just ring your way around this way and come forward, we'll get through this and we will hear from everyone who wants to speak. We get the 1 2-minute session and that's it. They're not going to have any give and take If you have questions, the applicants, representatives, and we will be taking notes and they'll be answered afterward. But we really don't have the capability with this format and this many people to have a back and forth if you need to have further clarification. So I hope we can make this work for everybody. With that, we'll start with Ann. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Bonnie. For the board members, I don't know, I was on the board for the 16 months of deliberation for the original project. And I appreciate seeing so many familiar faces. I think I just
Ann?
have,
You
yes.
set a good example. Your address?
Oh, my goodness. 230, where is she?
You just took out for a moment.
All right,
Oh.
go on the record. Get go on the record.
Okay,
Don't worry.
okay, 239 Water Street, Newburyport, sorry. So just a couple of comments. The first is on the characterization, I think, by the applicant, that there were substantial reworkings of the plans during that first 16 months. I think for many people, it always came down to scale and massing. And I don't think any of the reworkings solved that issue, nor do I think the 5 proposed revisions do. I guess, as I felt previously, I really believe this project negatively impacts the character of the abutting neighborhood. I feel the same now. And if I were a working member, my vote would be the same. And so I would urge you to consider upholding what the board originally did.
Want to get through quickly tonight. Come on, next person. And please, honestly, no comments other than, yeah, thank you.
I'm not yelling at you. Good evening. My name is Charles Nutter, and I live at 30 Columbus Avenue in Newburyport. I've had the pleasure of being the architect for the Institute for Savings on many of their projects over the last 25 years. And I was involved with the initial designs of this project. The Institution for Savings has shown themselves to be one of Newburyport's greatest stewards. Of all the clients I have worked with, this one has consistently tried the hardest to work with various stakeholders. I've listened to almost every meeting that has been held regarding this project and watched the bank continue to make change after change to address the individual requests of board members and the public. And it has been frustrating. As an architect, I must say that the proposed expansion as presented is a fine-looking building. The project as presented meets all city ordinances, and it's important to note the city ordinance allows for a building height of 40 feet, and this design is less than 75% of that. The bank is in the business district, and the proposed expansion is consistent with other downtown businesses. I believe that the juxtaposition of a brick commercial building next to a residential neighborhood is one of the things that make this city so interesting. It can be seen in many neighborhoods where a 3 or 4 story mill building was built alongside small scale wood frame worker housing. This is part of the historic character of the city. I commend the bank for staying the course. The Institution for Savings building is one of the finest historic buildings in the city of Newburyport, and this addition does not take away from the beauty of the 1870 building. The Institution for Savings has been an asset to the city for over 200 years. And as we continue to see businesses close or move out of our city, we should all thank the bank for wanting to keep and expand its headquarters in Newburyport. Residents and tenants coming.
The time's up.
The time's up?
Yep.
Okay. I encourage you to remand, approve the remand. Thank you.
Hi, Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street. You may know the Historical Commission. I'm speaking just for myself tonight. The Historical Commission has not, and from what I understand, will not be reviewing this. But the individual members may submit comments if that's not already too late. I really just had one point to make, and that's I believe that this process has been fair. The applicant seems to feel that it was not fair. They seem to feel that the only possible reason their plan could be denied is due to unfairness. I disagree with that. We can agree on certain facts. We can agree, for example, that the eave height has been made 4 inches lower. That's in their plan. That's a fact. The applicant feels this is sufficient. That's an opinion. Maybe you agree, maybe you do not. Just want to reinforce that you can disagree, you can come to your own conclusions. That's not unfairness, that's the process. And I'll just give you 2 quick examples, time is limited. One is they suggested 2, quote, comparable sites that you might remember, those of you who were there at the time. These 2 sites that were proposed as, quote, comparable were huge lots. One was like up against the woods, totally not comparable. And they also, for example, keep referring to the mean height or the cornice height, whatever, conveniently glossing over that 4-inch eave height reduction I mentioned. So these are, these are things that, our boards, the NHC, you guys, we're here to review these facts, review all the arguments, and come to, a reasonable and fair conclusion. And I hope we'll do that. And not be intimidated or fear litigation or whatever, because I believe you and the board, you guys and the Historic Commission, I believe very strongly have been very fair, almost to the point of deference to the applicant. That's it. Thanks.
Tom Coulter-John, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. The Newburyport Preservation Trust still opposes this project in its current form. Unfortunately, this project still impairs the integrity and character of this historic neighborhood. It is still detrimental to the neighborhood. This proposal is not in harmony with the purpose and intent of the downtown overlay district. There have been countless meetings. The bank wants what it wants, but that does not help the neighborhood or the city. The size and massing are not reduced, and only minimal cosmetic changes have been made. This is a massive project, and has always been from the beginning. A small reduction does not make it any more palatable. The neighbors deserve relief and a resolution of their concerns. We hope you will vote no on it tonight. Thank you.
Mark Griffin, 3 Orange Street. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm a former direct abutter to this project when my wife and I owned a home at 4 Otis Place. I would like to first comment on the unique position that this remand order places the planning board. On the one hand, the settlement is the result of mediation between the applicant and presumably has been agreed to by the city because it views this as the best compromise to conclude the litigation. This in and of itself would be a compelling reason for citizens serving on the board to approve the bank's application. However, that is not what your charge is in hearing the application. You are applying the criteria of the city's ordinances to the application to determine if it meets those criteria. This is a difficult task since some of you were not present for the 14 or 16 months of hearings where the Historical Commission and the Planning Board painstakingly reviewed this matter. I was there as an abutter and now as a former abutter. This task will be more difficult as you do not have the benefit of an Historical Commission's report. As you just heard from the chair of the Historical Commission, they provided reports throughout that term. Even though our DOD ordinance requires such reports, these are omitted from the settlement agreement. Another difficulty you face is that the settlement agreement was negotiated only after the city agreed not to request a reduction in the bank's usable square footage. A significant concession on part of the city, and it just so happens the major reason that the neighbors objected to the project in the first place. As you may know, ultimately the planning board denied the bank's plan based mainly on the size of the addition. scale and massing, I guess you would call it. The settlement remand order does nothing to address those concerns. These changes are mostly aesthetic in nature. However, these difficulties need not constrain you in considering the application. You should do so based specifically on the criteria set forth in the downtown overlay district. It is my hope that when you consider these criteria, along with the many comments, that you will do the right thing and deny this application. Thank you.
Members of the board, my name is Steve Nepmeyer, and my family lives at 4 Otis Place, where we are directly adjacent to the proposed project. We are opposed to this application because of its scale. We agree with the Historical Commission and the many residents of Newburyport who are opposed to this project because we do not believe that it is in any form harmonious with our neighborhood. This board rightfully denied this application last year. The changes in the proposed settlement are superficial. These cosmetic changes do nothing to address our concerns that the character of our neighborhood will be forever damaged. Please do the right thing to protect the history and architecture of Newburyport. Please deny this application again. Thank you.
David, my name is Jim Poulin. I live on Market Street, Newburyport. Born and brought up in Newburyport, educated here. And today we have to all work to rules and regulations, whatever we do in life, as well as the planning board. We have building codes to work to. We have the standards for treatment of historic properties that we have to work to. And based on the latest modifications to the plan, I see that the city and the bank have negotiated a good plan that meets the requirements of the code. If all else fails, go back to the code, what's the code require? Have we met the requirement of the code? And looking at the data on the screen earlier, setbacks are well within the requirements of the code. The heights are well below the code. The space is occupied space is well below the code. This is a commercial piece of property. It's a commercial piece of property, and it has to be judged according to that code. Yes, it abuts other residential properties. They have a residential code. The commercial property has a commercial code. You go to the building code and search it, as I've done a couple of times. There's a clear division between the commercial property and the residential property. They do not talk about commingling the requirements between the two areas. They are completely independent. So I recommend that we accept the current agreed upon proposal and march on with this. It meets the code. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tara Cedarholm. I live at 23rd Street. I wonder if I could ask Mr. Port if he could put on the aerial view, which would be great. Great, and just leave it like that. So I wanted to take Chair Sontag's advice and simply say that I agreed with Ann Gardner and Glenn Richards' point of view. But I wanted to bring up a couple of other points to you this evening. So one is that, and I'm repeating what Tom Holtzjohn said, is that you will not have the benefit of historic Christian report for this. And one of the things that you're missing with not having the historic commission report is really understanding that the Secretary of Interior Standards really require any addition to a historic building, which the Institution for Savings is a historic building, to be subordinate to that building. And if you look at this aerial view, you will see in no way is this addition subordinate to the historic structure. We went around this, the Historic Commission went around this planning board went around this for months. And we have not achieved that. No amount of copper flashing at the roof line or extensive exotic landscaping or raised landscaping beds is going to change what we can all see here, which is that this addition is not subordinate and you do not meet the Secretary of Interior standards for being subordinate to a historic building. You must deny this. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Belly. I live at 5 Russell Terrace. I wanted to first off say that I agree wholeheartedly with the gentleman that just spoke about the zoning and following all the ordinances. On top of that, I did want to add something else. A lot has happened on this earth the past 2 years, and the fact that the Institution for Savings is still here trying to get this project accomplished when a lot of other companies are deciding to close their headquarters, take people out of downtown areas. I really think that the fact that they're doing that is going to help our small businesses downtown in the long run. And I wholeheartedly think you should move forward with approving this project. Far too many of those downtown businesses have already suffered and closed. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Megan Ash. Can everybody hear me? No. My name is Megan Ash. I live at 1 Boylston Street, and I stand before you tonight in unwavering support of the Institution for Savings plans and honored to vocalize my support. The plans before the board tonight meet the city ordinance, and I ask that you focus on the remand that is before you. The Institution for Savings has been in Newburyport for 150 years and is recognized as an incredible asset to our community. Without their invaluable support and investment into our community, Newburyport would not be where it is today. As a community, we have immensely benefited from their continued support and generosity throughout the years, which enrich our daily lives as citizens. The Institution for Savings has approached this process in a thoughtful and respectful manner. The remand is an outcome of 2 days of mediation, which included several members of city government and 2 members of the planning board. The proposed addition does not take away from the historic building. The bank is located in a business district, and its proposed building is consistent with the architectural style, size, and density of other commercial structures in the downtown. This is a pattern we see all over Newburyport. It's extremely important for Newburyport to support its business partners who repeatedly support our community wherever the need arises. Where would we be without the Institution for Savings? I strongly encourage you, the planning board, to approve this plan as presented. And I thank you for your time.
My name's Art Courier. I live at 100 State Street. And over the course of time that I've lived here, there's been a lot of emotional issues, and this is no doubt one of them. It's really at hand because of the emotions of the neighbors, along with the bank officials who want to do the right thing for the community. So rather than repeat what Mr. Nutter has said and others have said, I think it's time to think about the community and not just the neighborhood. This community has a lot of elements, and a lot of people I know that don't live in the neighborhood are very confused on why this is standing so long as an embattled emotional issue, when it should be looked at from the code point of view, from the design modifications that have been made in consideration. So there's been a fair amount of communication, but it's now time to collaborate and please think holistically and approve what's been put forward. It's been due diligence.
My name is Donald Nelson. Our property is at 43 Prospect Street. I'm going to start by saying I'm not a fan of change. I don't like change. I still use a handwritten calendar. I've resisted cell phones and computers. But the fact of the matter is that change is a reality, and it's something that we all have to deal with. And change is part of progress, and progress is part of what the Institution for Savings is representing in this proposal downtown. They need to be able to grow with the community, to service the community. One thing we know is that the bank has always tried to work with the community. And it's evident from the many proposals that this is what they have attempted to do in this setting. From the window design to the setbacks to the landscaping, and the elevations, they're all in keeping with the suggested revisions and city ordinances. And in fact, it's consistent with other structures in the area, including the structures across State Street. If you look at the buildings near that exist near the library and up Harris Street. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that if the bank were to say to us all, and we put ourselves in this situation, that we cannot function unless we're allowed to grow with the times and progress. And if they were to leave that property, we might be faced with a much less desirable alternative. And that's what I, as a resident of the area, think about, and I would encourage you all to think about. And I would say mediation implies that there's an agreement that is in the works to be made around a project. And it's a matter of how that agreement is achieved and worked towards. And I would say this agreement needs to happen. I would encourage the board to move forward and approve it. Thank you.
Having been a high school principal for 21 years previously, I hope that I can be heard. I am John Elwell, and I live at 266 High Street. I speak in support of the Institution for Savings Building Plan. According to my research, the current plan has been through a number of changes and revisions based on suggestions and input from citizens, neighbors, and city officials. In addition, the current plan is a result of intense mediation over 2 days with representatives of the city government, members of the planning board, and IFS officials. The bank is in a business district, as said earlier, which comprises much of downtown Newburyport. The bank's proposal, in my view, has maintained the architectural design of much of downtown Newburyport. They own the lot where the addition will be sited. It has been suggested that they build a new bank structure elsewhere in the city. But where they want to build the new structure is to keep the bank together on their land, and much more convenient for residents to get to and to access. And it meets city bylaws. The Institution for Savings has been a major benefactor to the city in so many ways. To name just a few, running the largest student credit fair in the country, supporting many charitable foundations, and offering significant college scholarships. Thank you for your consideration.
Good evening. Clara Papanowski, CU 3 Orange Street. The Institution for Savings is generous and has supported our community over the years. That's a fact, and it is appreciated by all. It's also an irrelevant fact concerning what is before you this evening. We are here to determine whether the bank's current design is appropriate under the Downtown Overlay District Ordinance. Now, if the elephant in the room, which is DOD, by the way, must be addressed and revamped, then it should be taken up by the mayor and the city council, not here. I oppose the current proposal expansion before you for one reason only, one that has been debated for more than 2 years. Even city boards such as yours and the Historical Commission in 2021 have told the IFS to go back to the drawing board and come back with a more sensitive design, specifically reduce the size, yet the applicant has refused to budge. The proposal before you keeps the size of the addition the same as the proposed expansion that was rejected by this board in March 2021. The Historical Commission, which weighed in the first time around, found that the expansion fell short of maintaining the integrity and caliber of the historic neighborhood. The Historical Commission is not involved this time for the proposed settlement, which in itself violates DOD requirements. Yet the city's negotiation team agreed to the condition as well as not reducing its size. Why? A potentially final decision now rests with you. It is my hope that the planning board will continue to focus on the merits of the applicant's proposed design and not the corresponding litigation in the land court, which resulted with the one-sided and unfair proposed settlement. If the planning board focuses on the latter and approves the current design out of fear of potentially losing in court, it will set dangerous precedent for the city and provide a playbook for individuals, businesses, developers seeking to circumvent the DOD, further eroding Newburyport's historic character as well as trust in city government. The bank has the right to expand, and I do support that, but not with this design and not at the expense of fairness and how we conduct ourselves as a community.
Time.
I'm done. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you very much for coming tonight. My name is Ann Clausen. I speak for my family who lives at 3 Otis Place, my husband Aaron and daughter Sydney. We live and work in the community. I work in the community. I'm a special ed teacher. I love the community. I'm here 24/7. So it's not just personal, but we have a situation where I couldn't agree more with what Mark said, what Ian Gardner said. This comes down to the Historic Commission hasn't had an opportunity to weigh in this time around concerning the DOD. So I ask you please to deny this proposal. It does, as Claire just mentioned, set a precedence for our community. We are not asking the bank not to build. We are asking the bank to minimize the size. I kept hearing the word appearance. That's huge. Appearance. That's exactly right. You're leading us with an appearance, but it's not the fact. It's huge. And the concern is that, again, this is going to be detrimental to Newburyport as a city. And the Historic Commission, again, has not been able to weigh in on this, and they're crucial to what Newburyport stands for. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sean Sullivan. I live at 9 Prospect Street, the yellow house directly across from the proposed development. I live there with my wife Jennifer and my daughter Elle. I'm opposed to this development, as I have been all along, due to the size and the scale of it. Council had shown an evolution of the plans for those of you that haven't been through all these meetings. For all those plans, we're talking of a change of inches after all this time. From the plan that was rejected by the planning board, we're still dealing with inches. It's essentially the same size and scale. And that was the reason, the main reason behind the rejection of this plan. This monstrosity will have a big impact on the quality of life inside my home. This doesn't quite capture it, but my house is quite smaller than all of my neighbors around it. And the top floor of my house, the windows only go up halfway up this proposed building. It's a colonial salt box style that it goes well below the road, the original steps of it, and this will essentially block out the sun for most of the day in the winter time. And that will have a dramatic effect on my house. What you're hearing here tonight, a lot of the comments have been, they're allowed to go right up to the edge of the property. It fits within the building codes. It does. But it's your job. But what they're leaving out is with the approval of the planning board. It's your job to look at this. While it is legal under those terms, is it a good idea to put it in? Would you want this down your street? Would you want this in front of your family blocking out the sun? That's your job. I would ask you to review this carefully and follow the lead of the last planning board and reject this proposal, send it back to court where it should be right now. That's it. Thank you for your time.
My name is Peter Mackin. I live at 11 and 13 Prospect Street, which is directly across the street from the new construction. I want to make it clear, residents do not oppose the ability for IFS to grow, okay? But we all disapprove and oppose building such a large, look at that, a large building in such a small location. I want to thank everybody on the planning board for coming to the on-site tour today and getting that perspective of just what's going to change with regard to what you're not going to see as much as what you're going to see in the way of a big building. A big building's attached to two other buildings. In March of 2021, as you know, after 14 months of meetings and presentations, the Newburyport Planning Board rejected the final proposal. This board ruled it was too massive and too high. It was not subordinate to the original 1870s building and did not meet the DOD requirements. Finally, this board stated it was not compatible with the historic residential and commercial area. The planning board and the historic commission repeatedly asked IFS to make it smaller, to meet directly with the neighbors. They never did. Consider other options. And they gave IFS a number of suggestions on other options. IFS never considered other corporate options with regard to size or location. Now the planning board must decide if the latest cornice and landscaping changes really make a difference. Do they make the structure smaller or not as high? No, they don't. Is it now subordinate to the 1870s building? And does it meet the DOD requirement? No, it doesn't. Is it now compatible with size and scale of the neighborhood? No, not at all. So for this reason, please deny the application. Thank you for your consideration. I hope I was heard.
Good evening, I'm Bruce Vogel. I live at 5 Bromfield Court. I obviously am a resident of Newburyport. I only have one head, but I do have two hats on. I'm also a Newburyport City Councilor at large, and I will express opinions both from as a resident and as a city councilor. I heard over and over again through this course of time the words too massive, too large, scale, mass, over and over and over again. And it was with that input from my constituents, citywide constituents, that I voted no when this came before us the first time around last session. I also voted no when it came around to us again in the next session, this current session, when we were accompanied by many new members on city council who, quite frankly, I don't think really understood what we were voting on. And now we're back here, which is very unfortunate. What was just said by the gentleman before me and the others speaking in the opposition, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's very clear. It's too big. And it's very unfortunate that you're here and have to look at this again. The institution obviously is an institution in the community. They speak highly of themselves. The community speaks highly of them. I think they missed the boat here. I think that if they really do honor the community and they really are the institution that serves the community, they would take another look at this and they would diminish the mass and the scale. Thank you. Good luck.
My name is Richard Malozzi. My family lives at 16 Prospect Street, one of the abutting properties. I strongly oppose the size and scale of this expansion. It's easy to dismiss the abutters to a project like this as people are simply doing what you would expect them to do, not in my backyard kind of stuff. But with this kind of reasoning, you could dismiss the abutters no matter how bad a project is for the city. The scale of this project is bad for Newburyport, damaging a treasured historic neighborhood and setting several dangerous precedents for the future development. We abutters are the canary in the coal mine, not just a vocal minority that does not represent the views of the residents of the city. We are, of course, more sensitive to the impact of such a project, but please do not dismiss us as being unrepresentative. Instead, consider this project as the precedent setter and imagine many such projects appearing throughout historic neighborhoods of Newburyport. Would you look at the project the same way then? If you wouldn't approve many such projects, please do not approve this one. Thank you.
Jean Costello, 522 Merrimack Street, to amplify so many of the statements in opposition. So there was a lot of due diligence, analysis. It was rejected by 3 city bodies. I think that was the right decision. I think the issues that are coming up subsequent to those 3 decisions are starting to get into some of the emotions and things that we were talking about that I do think should be set aside. I think the issue of precedent is very, very important. And I just want to share that I moved here a couple of years ago from a community in Central Mass, West Boylston, and we faced a decision just like this. We let in a building that was too big for the location. And then 10 years later, when we had done it too many times before, we started asking ourselves, what happened? How did we get this way? I don't want us in that position 10 years from now. Thank you.
John McCoy, 1466 Street. I'm here in support of the institutional savings plan. They are within the code of the commercial district. They've been a great institution for the city of Newburyport, and you've gone through mediation with them now over the last 2 years. You know, you're in the mediation process here now to the final end of the 24th of the month, I believe. Instead of having a land court judge mediate it down and have them make the final decision, I support it so that you can make the final decision yourselves. And they mediated in good faith.
Hello, my name is Patty Myers, and I live at 14 Sylvester Street. I'm here to urge you to vote no for this expansion plan. It's too big, and it will impact the neighborhood negatively. The City Council, the Historic Commission, and the previous planning board have all rejected this, and I think with good reason. Finally, I think this would set a very dangerous precedent for future developers with deep pockets and have those developers, like I live down the street from the hospital. What is to say that the hospital wanted to expand in my neighborhood and they offered money to our neighbors and bought out the property? That would be very scary to me. And what would stop them if something like this was allowed to go through? So I urge you to consider the implications for the future and also to respect some of the local boards and our local government and what they've already said. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rita Mihalik. I live at 53 Warren Street. I was 8 years on Charter Street, so I know the neighborhood and I know the town pretty well. I just wanted to say that I really urge you to make a final no on this project tonight. And I agree with everybody who has felt that way on their urging you to deny it. I just want to say that just because the bank is mighty and powerful and rich and can build this building, doesn't mean that they should. And I also don't think that it's their right to build it. I rather think that it's their privilege, just as it's my privilege to live in this great town and to voice my opinion here tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pam Kiff, and I live at 11 Tremont Street, a couple blocks away from the bank. And I urge you to vote no, as you did the last time. Saturday afternoon, I brought up the notes of the March 17th meeting. And I noted those voting against were for all the same reasons that you should vote against it again. The size of the mass, the not complying with the subordinates, the Secretary of Interior requirements for subordinating to the historic building and being in keeping with the neighborhood. And so I completely will reference Ann Gardner's statements, Tom Coulter John's statements, Mark Griffin's statements, Stephen's last name I didn't get, Tara from Fruit Street, Claire, Ann Glosson. That if you were to vote for this and not send it back to land court, it would literally be like ripping up the DOD and throwing it away. Because there's the elephant in the room. The bank has met the commercial requirements, but not those of the downtown overlay district. And the historic commission looked at this. They should be able to look at it for the settlement. So I also am concerned. I'm concerned for the neighbors, for drainage, for having that big a size so close to them. We had a neighbor build a 4-car garage on Tremont Street, and we also had a yucky apartment building turned into 2 townhomes with sloping driveways. And guess who gets flooded when there's a big rainstorm now? Me. I've been there 33 years, and we never flooded before, but it's since you take away ground space and you put in roof and everything. So there's a million, everybody said what I'm thinking, but please respect the DOD and thank you for your time, because you guys put in so much time. So thank you.
Good evening, Mark Sendron, 91 High Street. I'm an indirect abutter. I think this project, unfortunately, really mars the character of Newburyport. We all live in Newburyport. We love the city. It is unfortunate that the IFS has been deaf to the comments of the community and to the people living around here. I do have a question for the architect, for the lawyers. You mentioned the mean height. What is the absolute height of this building?
I'll answer that afterward, otherwise.
Yeah. So this, to me, is a big concern because the project is massive and they do not represent exactly what the height of the project is. It is really unfortunate that they have been through a number of processes and still persist with the same project. And I urge you to vote against this project. Thank you.
Hi.
That mic's not working.
It's not working. Well, I've been
We're still thinking.
40 years, so I think you'll hear me. So I actually am a pretty shy person, and for me to get up here and to speak about this takes a lot of on my part. I live on Otis Place, number 16, and I've lived there for almost 20 years.
And your name is?
Oh, I'm sorry, Paula Renda.
Thank you.
So the Institute for Savings proposal for me is just too massive and too big. And it's out of step with our historic neighborhood, our district, and it crowds on an already very congested neighborhood, if you've ever been there, especially in the winter. Our neighborhood already deals with limited parking, a crisscross of wires, tight roads, sidewalks, and questionable access to emergency vehicles. The Institute for Savings design will further encroach on the only natural light and the open space that our historic district and neighborhood finds so crucial. I urge you to vote no.
I don't see anyone more in that corner. I'm going to assume that everybody who has spoken, who wants to speak has already spoken. Is that correct? Last call. Okay, so I'm going to close the public comment section of this public hearing. Thank you once again for all your comments. And I'll turn it over to the applicant again to respond to specific questions and any comments that you heard that you would like to respond to.
So thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Costa representing the Institution for Savings. I will say I didn't hear many questions from members of the public. I heard many comments, and as I had indicated at the start, not surprising comments, ones we've heard before. Certainly the public, members of the public, neighbors are entitled to their opinions. I will attempt to address a few comments that I thought were inaccurate. Maybe don't tell the whole story, comments on which I have a different perspective or opinion. Ultimately, it's your opinion that matters, but I'll comment on those few topics. And I think I'll probably invite our consultants to come up and address a couple of the questions that I did hear voiced. So one of the things I heard said early on in the comments that were made is that, you know, we are, the eave height has been made no more than 4 inches lower. And the suggestion, of course, being, and I think the comment was made in the larger context of other comments, that the institution hasn't made sufficient enough concessions. And I want to be clear, and I think that I was when I first presented to you tonight, that there are programmatic requirements associated with a project of this sort. We made that known through the public hearing process over the course of 14 or 16 months that we would make certain concessions and adjustments, and we did reduce the overall footprint and square footage of the proposal. Did we cut it in half? Did we reduce it by a third? We did not, and we made it known that we couldn't practically do that and achieve the purpose for which we require the addition for programmatic reasons. What we did do is we made adjustments that we felt were architecturally appropriate for the neighborhood. If you do look at the different iterations of the plans, and again, you only have snippets in that May 18th letter we submitted, or the May 18th letter we submitted, but you can look back at the full record and you can see the full sets of plans we submitted over the course of many months of public hearings, and they are substantively different. Doesn't necessarily mean in each iteration the size is entirely different. We have one iteration that looks nothing like what you see on your screen. It was residential in character, clapboard siding. It matched what was on many of the residential houses in the surrounding area. We thought we were being responsive to some comments we had received in a previous session of the public hearing. Turns out we came to the next session of the public hearing and the planning board member said, that's not what we want at all. We like it the way it was before. And so we went back and we've now got something that's more in keeping with the institutional or non-residential character of the site. So I do take some exception to the suggestion that concessions haven't been made, certainly maybe not concessions that are satisfactory to the neighbors, but I do believe that the institution worked throughout the public hearing process to make concessions and commitments in an attempt to meet the needs of the community and the desires of the planning board. And I think that if you look, I know that if you look at, again, those objective standards that are referenced in our supporting narrative, you'll see that, you know, we're even if the adjustment was only 4 inches lower, and it's not quite that simple because the height is not a single height for the entire proposal that's before you. There are different heights depending upon the different heights of the roof structure, as you saw in a different graphic previously. But there were also so many different iterations. The height was lower, the height was raised, in an effort to try and address the overall aesthetic of the site as expressed through various planning board members' approvals. But the bottom line is we are still, and one individual did say this when he spoke, we are still at less than 75% of the maximum height requirement for the district in which we're located. I think that's important to rely upon those objective standards. I'm not suggesting that the objective standards absolutely win the day and that they're the only thing that you can look at as a planning board. We're before you for a DOD special permit, but I think the objective standards are important in recognizing whether this is the type of project that under your zoning ordinance was contemplated in a location like this, in a business district, even in a business district that might be surrounded on a couple of sides, on a few sides, by residential homes, some of which are in a residential district. As you heard another member of the public say, that is sort of the nature of development of a community like Newburyport. Another comment I want to respond to, something that I heard said, was that the Historic Commission has not had an opportunity to opine or to issue a report. That's not accurate. It's also not accurate to say that we have prohibited or indicated through negotiations or discussions that there can be no opinion expressed by the Historic Commission. What we did state and what has become a component, and you heard it stated at the start of the meeting tonight, the public hearing tonight. What we did say was that there was not going to be a mandatory referral with that 30-day waiting period as part of this remand process. Again, remands intend to be and are meant to be streamlined processes. And so what the remand order acknowledges is that there was not going to be a mandatory referral to the Historic Commission because quite honestly, quite frankly, this project already went to the Historical Commission over the course of that many-month process that was before you before. And the Historical Commission opined, and we know that the Historical Commission had some issues. You heard a representative of the commission speak tonight about his particular issues with the project. Again, they're entitled to their opinion as individual members and as a commission as a whole. I think what is important to remember as well, and this is in the record of the proceedings previously, is that two separate historic consultants were engaged by the Institution for Savings at the suggestion of the board. I think the initial one was, I know the initial one was proposed by the applicant, but there was some suggestion by the board that they needed the advice, the perspective of another historic consultant, somebody who was maybe more independent. And you have those opinions in writing, in the record of the proceedings previously, where those consultants opined that this project absolutely meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. So it's easy to get up here and say, no, it doesn't. It's not subordinate. It's not appropriate for the neighborhood. But we have consultants that walk through the specific standards that are promulgated by the Secretary of the Interior and said, this project meets those standards. And again, went through them one at a time. Consultants who are qualified to give that advice. You have the ability under your ordinance to engage your own consultant as part of the process. Your board chose not to do that. So I think that that's important to just recognize that that information is in the record of the proceeding before. And to the extent that it's part of this discussion now, I urge the board to reflect back on those opinions, because I think that they will establish for the board that this project does meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. Another comment I heard made was that this is not legal. It's legal with the approval of the planning board. And then the question was asked as part of the same comment, that the board needed to evaluate whether this was appropriate. So, I appreciate the technicalities of zoning and the challenges that exist, especially in a community like Newburyport. Your ordinance is not the simplest of ordinances. You've got overlapping requirements for overlay districts, underlying zoning. You've got special permit processes and site plan processes, and then there are things that are allowed by right and things that are not. So I understand that. The point that was being made by me before, and I think the board understands this, in referencing the provisions on page 2 of the narrative that we submitted, the dimensional and density requirements, the parking analysis or parking calculation based upon the square footage of the proposed addition, was meant to show that this project is legal in as much as it meets those objective criteria of your ordinance. It meets the requirements of the underlying B2 district and meets them handily. It's nowhere near the maximum height allowed in the district. It meets all of these 0-yard setbacks that are intended for the B2 district. And so the question for you isn't so much as it meet those standards. The question is, under the downtown overlay district, does it meet the more subjective criteria? And in fact, when your board analyzed this before, and I reviewed Mr. Port's staff report today, and Ms. Sullivan's staff report today, and he makes a statement, or she makes a statement to this effect within the staff report, that ultimately the board rendered findings for the most part under the criteria that exist, both the general special permit criteria and even the DOD special permit criteria. Most of those criteria were satisfied. And I highlighted this in the complaint that we filed when we filed our appeal, that most of the standards were satisfied. The board had very specific, and if I can characterize them as this, very limited issue with this particular project, notwithstanding, how it may feel after hearing the barrage of neighbors who were speaking in opposition to it. Your board had very limited issues with this particular project, and they were limited to this concept of size and mass. And so when we entered into mediation, it was made known to us, when we made it known to the city through council, that we had limitations in terms of our flexibility or lack of flexibility with overall square footage and with the parking we needed to satisfy on site, which is a challenge balancing those two things. The city made it known to us that they had concern with the overall massing and the look of the site. And so what we did painstakingly over the course of a day and a half of mediation was try to bridge the gap between those two competing forces. Limitations on the institution's ability to reduce the square footage, but also the concerns that the city had with respect to the massing and the appearance, yes, I use that term, I'll use it again, the appearance of this structure, of the size of the structure as it related to its surroundings. And we believed, and those who attended the mediation, they signed their names on the dotted line, they believe too, that the commitments we made as part of that mediation process check those boxes and made this a more palatable project for the board and a project that the board could approve in looking to the limited issues that it had before and saying, okay, those limited issues are now satisfied. We think that they're satisfied. We think that this project does represent substantial concessions by the institution. We think that the mediated resolution is far better than the potential development of the site that could ensue post litigation. We think this is a better project, even than it was at the time of denial for the city, and we hope that you'll consider that and that you'll approve what's before you. If you have questions, and I don't know that you do, but I'm gonna reference it because a couple of residents said, if you have questions specifically about heights, height of the existing structure, height of the proposed addition, eve height versus mean height, I'm gonna let Chris Angelica speak to that if you'd like to hear some information. I know that he's done all the specific calculations. Chris, can you talk to that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think the clearest thing to do is put the elevations up. That's all sort of in black and white. You know, mean height is literally, you know, in between the highest possible peak and the eve. That's the calculation for mean height. So anybody who wants to really look at what the ultimate height of any part of the building is.
I think they're available, but actually I'm going to switch the PDF because I think we have a higher resolution on that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to read the actual numbers, so you'll have to either read them off or do them from memory if they don't show up clearly.
Well, I mean, they're there. 34 foot, you know, 4 is the ridge height, the ultimate ridge height, the highest point of the building. Cornice is sitting at 24'2" off the first floor. Mean height is right in between those. So I hope that clarifies things. And if, you know, this is part of public record, you can study it, you can look at it, you can do the math, and you'll know without a doubt exactly what the height is of all the components of the building.
No, we cannot take any more comments from the public, I'm sorry.
So all the documents are there in the enumerate all the components of the building.
All right, anything else that you want to respond to, or any member of your team want to respond to?
So I don't believe so, Madam Chair. Certainly, you know, as the board discusses, deliberates, I'm not sure whether your intention is to fully close the public hearing or not, but we're happy to respond to questions that board members may have. I attempted to address any comments or questions I heard from the public, but again, there were more opinions expressed than there were questions asked. But if board members have questions, we're available to answer them.
Okay, fine. So we'll now take it into deliberation among the board members. And I would like each member to speak to your considerations, your leanings at this point, and what you see as possible outcome for your potential vote. And I'd like you to relate it to specifically elements of the ordinance. We'll start with the DOD, and the Secretary of the Interior standards are incorporated into that, so they may be referenced as well. But whatever you feel is relevant to your thinking at this point, I'm also including the two members on remote. They'll be speaking as well. I'd like us to hear that, and it can be back and forth, or it can be one person at a time, and we'll go on to the next, however you want to handle it. But let's get started with whoever would like to kick it off. Okay, Alden.
Just a couple of questions. I know in some of the previous designs and presentations, you had references to the eve heights of the buildings across the street. Do you have those figures available as well?
We can look at what's here. I mean, we did not bring all of the presentation with us.
Where are you going with this question? What's the?
There are a couple that are directly adjacent.
Yeah, I just wanted to refresh my memory from what it was. I can go back and look at some of that. I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of the scale of the new proposal compared to what it was in the buildings across the street, across Prospect.
So through you, Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes.
So I have, and I'm just referring to correspondence of the letter of transmittal or submittal that we made with the last iteration of our plans prior to the board's denial and the ensuing litigation and mediation. And as part of that correspondence, we had addressed the design changes, and then we had provided ridge heights and eave heights for the then proposal, which is effectively the same as today. It's been reduced somewhat with respect to the eave. It's been reduced by about 12 inches with regard to the eave. And then we proposed comparisons to the 1870 structure on the site, the original structure. And then we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other properties, 11 to 21 Prospect, 16 Otis, 3 to 5 Otis, 4 Otis, 7 to 9 Otis, and 9 to 11 Garden, attempting to try to get sort of a cross section of the properties surrounding the site. Our proposal was a ridge height of 13 feet 3 inches. Excuse me, 33 feet 3 inches, and an eave height of 24 feet 6 inches. And again, that eave height has now been reduced to approximately 23 feet 6 inches. Am I right on that, Chris? So the 1870 building, the original Institution for Savings building on the site, has a ridge height of 33 feet 11 inches, so it's taller at the ridge, and an eave height of 30 feet 8 inches, so also meaningfully taller at the eave. I can go through each of the others, but I will tell you, and I'm happy to if you'd like, but generally speaking, with respect to those 6 other properties I referenced, the highest among them for ridge height was 9 to 11 Garden, which had a 40-foot 5-inch ridge height. And the lowest among them was 4 Otis, which had a 28-foot ridge height. And the others were in between 32, 32.8, excuse me, 34.8, 36.2, 36 to 37. So they were in between. The eave heights were similarly varied. So in terms of eave height, again, our proposal was 24 feet 6 inches. The 1870 original Institution for Savings building has an eve height of 30 feet 8 inches. And then of those other 6 properties, the highest of the eve heights among them was 23 feet 6 inches. That's again the 9 to 11 Garden Street property. And the shortest among them was 21 feet 2 inches. That's the 16 Otis Street property, Otis Place property. And the others are in between 22, 21, 22, 23 feet in that vicinity. So it's based upon these numbers that we represented that we felt that we were generally consistent, not the absolute lowest in the neighborhood, but generally consistent with the surrounding properties, the surrounding residential properties.
All right, I'm looking for, not questions if we're finished with questions, but statements. Somebody's got to open their mouth first or I'll call on you. You don't want me to do that. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for the very detailed discussion tonight. Appreciate all of the input. I guess I continue to be concerned about a few things that are less related to massing and more related to the functioning of the project, primarily the parking, which is frankly a little bit of an unknown. I would really appreciate seeing the traffic study that was prepared previously. I've worked on projects that have mechanized parking solutions, and I know the throughput and the operation of that system is a critical component of traffic and queuing, and I would just like a little bit more information about that part of it. I think we've talked enough about mechanical systems, but there are obviously some details to work out there to make sure that all of that gets accommodated within the image of the project that has been presented here. There are units to be accommodated within roof structures. There are louvers to be provided. Hopefully all of that can be provided within the image of the project as it's been presented. I will say also the reason why I was asking about details of the architect. A project like this, beyond its massing and siting, really lives in the details. And you're juxtaposed against one of the architectural gems in the city of Newburyport. And I hope, although it's very difficult to represent all of that in SketchUp renderings, I hope that the level of detail, the quality of materials, some of which have not been identified yet, are commensurate with the environment that you're going to be living in here potentially. There is architectural quality here that you need to match. And that is all about the details and the selections of materials. Lastly, I would say relative to the street, I would agree wholeheartedly with the comment that Newburyport is a kind of wonderful mixture of scales, of materials, of building types. And I think this has a potential for being another example of that. The street, I paced off the street when we were on the sidewalk earlier this evening, and I paced about 40 feet from the face of existing residential to what would be the face of the bank building. So 40 feet in width and 24 feet approximately to the eave height is not a bad proportion for that street. And I think in terms of sunlight, given the sloping roofs, I think you will still get sun at street level on the street, given the width that we're talking about here. So I'm a little less concerned about massing given all of that. So I think, Chair, I think those are my comments. That's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, do you wish to have us respond to comments of
If you
that
want
sort?
to, yeah, sure.
Thank you. So I appreciate those comments and some of those concerns. And I've got Attorney Mead whispering in my ear because she was more involved originally in permitting and reminding me of some of the details of which I already know. So much of the information you're referring to is in the record previously. We can resubmit it again. I appreciate that you didn't have an opportunity to review it when it was originally before the board. There's a shadow study that we produced as part of the public hearing record. We also produced information concerning the type and obviously the quality of materials that are proposed. The nature of a project like this, when it's before a permitting authority, is that what you tend to get as the permitting authority are, conceptual plans to some extent. Here you're dealing with renderings. They're not the same. They don't contain the same level of construction detail as would be included in plans submitted to your building department for a building permit. But we appreciate the concerns, and they're legitimate concerns of the planning board that what you end up with is going to be a high quality finished product. So we're happy to certainly resubmit the materials you're requesting if you want an opportunity to see them. We're certainly happy to direct you to where they might be in the record already, to the extent that the city can make them available. I'm sure that Mr. Port has probably a very large file at this point on this particular project. But that information is in the record, and to the extent that there is information you're seeking that you don't have, we can certainly provide it to address these concerns. But we have the parking or the traffic analysis that will address the issue of queuing in connection with the vehicle storage system. Certainly, topics like mechanical systems. I don't know that I can recall it having come up before this board previously, but I'm sure that it has. Many boards I appeared before have concerns about the visibility of mechanical systems on rooftops and whatnot, especially in historic districts. So we can address those, through representations we made, but also, through conditions of approval that simply specify that we're not, other than what's shown on the plans, we're not gonna, plunk a mechanical system on the edge of the rooftop where you can easily see it from a location where you wouldn't want to see it. So legitimate concerns, and we feel we've addressed most of them previously. We're happy to readdress them.
Yeah, so I can have a few comments. So yeah, I appreciate the presentation tonight. I like the materials that have been presented here more than some of the previous submissions. I do think that relates more to the historic building. So I think that part is good. I guess some of my concerns about the overall project, as far as the size and some of that, I think has been precluded essentially by the mediation. I would have liked to see more, to see what could have been done to potentially lower the first level by going deeper into below grade and so forth. But I understand that there have been issues with that, and the city engineer has spoken to that as well. And just the overall square footage has all been precluded by the mediation. So those are some of the concerns I had. As far as I do want to review some of the DOD requirements further, just to get a sense of that. But some part of my sense of it, I do see that there's a separation from the historic building because of the distance that it's set back from the historic. So therefore, I don't think that in my sense, it is somewhat subordinate to the historic building just because of the distance it is from the historic building, and it's not abutting right against the historic building. So, but I'd like to look at that more closely in the DOD requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. The only comment I'll make in response to that, just because I don't want it to be misunderstood by the board, I heard the statement precluded by the mediation. So I appreciate what you meant by that. Yeah. I will tell you that there was significant discussion, certainly in our room, and I imagine amongst city officials, because there was back and forth with which the mediator assisted, concerning attempts to do what you've proposed. So it wasn't that it was precluded in the sense that, because I did indicate that we set parameters, so to speak, in indicating that entering into mediation, we couldn't reduce the square footage. Despite that, there were discussions in mediation about efforts to try to reduce the overall height as opposed to square footage, and how we could structure the connector versus the addition itself, how we could work within the confines of the site, the elevations of the site, what the stormwater or civil engineering effects of that were. And as you say, we went so far as to, between the sessions of the mediation, provide an explanation as to why it was that we couldn't go lower based upon the elevation, stormwater complications, site design, civil engineering, and got the city engineer to review and confirm that we weren't full of it. So I just wanted to be clear about it in terms of precluded by the mediation. It was discussed, but it was determined through the mediation process that simply wasn't practical or feasible.
The only other issue connected with the parking is I guess I'm a little disappointed that something could have been done closer to the original proposal, having other off-site parking to help eliminate the need for the height of the parking level as well.
Again, fair point. And our original proposal included off-site parking. That was our thought originally as well. We got an earful early on in the process about off-site parking. And so we responded accordingly by moving the parking on site. So it's this push and pull. It's this this balancing act where we're trying to satisfy the requirements of the ordinance, both objective and subjective, meet the needs of the board, be responsive to feedback received from the board, and also, responsive to, opposition from residents and neighbors and whatnot concerning things like not just the building itself, but parking and where that parking would be.
Thank you.
Meyer. I just personally, I want everyone to, I did listen very well to both sides, and I'm taking all of that in. I think that this particular location just lends itself to an unfortunate situation because it is a coexistence of commercial and residential, and it's a unique property for that reason. And not to minimize the size of the structure, because I do think it is large, and it is larger than I would want to see it. I also look at the B2 and I can see that it is smaller than it could be. So it could be a much larger structure occupying more of a footprint in this location. And I lean into the fact that this is a downtown, largely commercial area, and that this is properly zoned for what they're doing. I also think that it complements well the 1870 structure and its distance. So it's sort of like a bookends to this property that I think does work well and has been thoughtful.
I'll jump in unless there's comments from the applicant in response to. So I'm one of the new members that's come up a few times. I've been drinking from the fire hose a little bit on this application, trying to give it the attention that it deserves. I've spent more time on this application than all the other applications so far in aggregate, I'm sure, trying to get up to speeds. And I really appreciate all the opinions expressed tonight and the passion and the energy that both the public and the board have put into this. So I'm still playing catch up, I think, but hopefully I can maybe be a little more transparent in how I'm thinking about this, to be as open as possible and where my mind is going. I'm just one vote on this board, so I'm not necessarily trying to persuade my colleagues, but I will try to explain why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking as best I can. So for me, I just break it into components. The general special permit findings to me are very easy to come to the conclusion or satisfied by the application, primarily by the as of right use of this location and the dimensional controls. So the general special permit findings, I think, are really straightforward. So nearly a 1 acre site on State Street, it's a little under 1 acre, but it's a large site. So really the big challenge, and I think there's no disagreement on this, it's really the more subjective aspects of the DOD and whether or not, when you can build something large, how big is too large, or how much smaller than what's allowed should you be able to go? So that's the much more challenging question that we have to ask and answer tonight or over the next couple of nights. So in other words, how much should the applicant have gone down in size? I know a lot of developers will put an application in that's larger than they need, knowing that there's some room at the back. I don't necessarily know that we have any evidence that that was the case with the bank. They probably submitted, I would care to guess that they submitted something more closely to what they actually needed on the location. And so there wasn't a lot of room to downsize it. So then it just became a matter of how to put that into an envelope that made the most sense and was respectful to the neighborhood. And be compatible with the existing historic character and buildings as the DOD requires, right? So that was the real challenge they were up against. And I respect the opinions, a lot of the opinions expressed tonight, both for and against. But for me, just as one person, a constant refrain of it's too big or too massive is not enough. I need to dig into that in more detail and really parse that down into what does that mean to be too big or too small? So what are the alternatives for me? So, it's a 2-story building. It's not a 3 or 4-story building that would be allowed in the ordinance by right and the dimensional controls. It's not 100% of the site, it's roughly a third of the site. So to me, the size isn't too big inherently by what's being proposed. So that's really more of a question of the character of it and where it's located. I would have thought maybe we could have explored something on State Street. That might have made a little more sense, put the parking lot in the back. But then you're right adjacent to the historic building. And I think in many ways, I'd echo things that my colleagues said, that putting the addition farther away from the historic structure was a good move. It does subordinate it to the structure by virtue of its location. It's way back in the lot instead of up front near it. And it's a little shorter. Maybe people would like it to be shorter, but it's a commercial building. It's a commercial 2-story building. And that by its nature is going to be a little taller than a 2-story residential structure. It's just going to be a little bit bigger, not necessarily inordinately so. So, and then last but not least, like a parking lot, it's not necessarily the best use for that either, right? And it has the same impervious surface that the structure has. So there's really not that much of an impact in terms of runoff. So I don't think a parking lot is a great long-term use for that site either. It should be something. So to me, I come around to a 2-story commercial structure toward the rear of the lot. Maybe not the only solution, but a rational solution and a solution that kind of makes sense. So then the devil's then for me parsing it down even further in the details. I do think that, I don't think it's too big ultimately, and I know that's a subjective call and people will disagree with that, but I think the way that the applicant has broken the building down into components, the way they pulled off the facade from Otis Street and create a little kind of pocket garden there, I think is actually quite nice. You don't see that a lot in the city. So I think there have been some, in total, some nice moves with this application. I do think the devil's in the details. I echo things that my colleague Bob said about, using historic brick details. I'm a little worried about those things myself. I would advocate for the standing seam metal, by the way, as an option. I think we have to tackle that at some point here, which option we want on the roof. And I would like to see a little more detail, ideally. I don't know if we have time for that, and I would like to know what my colleagues think about that. Because I think that the way it's executed and built ultimately could be a big part of the success beyond just the massing. So, but I'm generally tending to favor the application and supporting the remand. That's where my head is going. And I just want to be open and transparent about it and respectful to all the opinions expressed tonight, because I really do appreciate it.
Madam Chair, it's Richard. May I step in?
Yes, please do.
So I too am also a new member of the planning board and don't have the benefit of obviously having sat through the numerous submissions and revisions that were presented in the last couple of years. I've already raised my questions regarding the mechanical equipment, and as planning board member Coop had talked about, I think some of that is the devil is in the details. As the project continues to develop and refine itself, I think we have active interest to see what that roof scape really is like and the venting that's required for fresh air makeup and things of that sort. But all that said, I would encourage this project as it moves forward that a site mock-up is part of the deliverables in which we can really be able to look at the material assemblies on site, look at the quality of the brick, the mortar color, things of that sort, the assembly to the window, because I do think the details are going to really make or break this project. All that said, I can appreciate the difficulties of this site and its balancing between residential and commercial, but from the perspective of what is being submitted, I do believe it's in characteristic and support this project that presented.
Okay, thank you. Don, are you there? Do you want to dive in now?
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Bonnie? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Okay. With respect to the board, I'm in somewhat a unique position in that of the 4 eligible voting board members, the last decision, I was the only one that voted yes. So I was in the minority. And as I was in the past, I was very respectful and took under strong advisement all of the commentary by both the opponents as well as supporters of this project. A couple of clarifications or comments I would like to make, and to cut to the chase, first of all, nothing I've heard would have me reverse my decision in that this would be a positive vote. But I do think some clarifications I'd like to make. I do think that really nothing has changed. The 5 modifications, and again, I'm respectful that others have their own opinion, and some of this is objective. I think those changes are negligible, minor, de minimis, whatever. And as was, I think, clearly stated in the DOD special permit, as well as the site plan review. And I'll digress for a moment and underscore, this is an and. The planning board voted not only the DOD, but also site plan review. So even if the DOD was not in existence, that the underlying zoning, we still have the authority, and I believe courts have upheld the ability for the planning board to use reasonable subjectives. Of course, I just personally disagree with the applicant's filing of the appeal where they said our decision was arbitrary and capricious, although I understand that's standard language. But going back to what was there, the scaling and massing hasn't changed. And if there's any solace to some of the folks that talked about the historical commission, if the historical commission looked at it, there'd be no difference than what they did before, because nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I do think also, I think one of, someone may have inferred or implied, I should say, that because this was mediation, we don't have the ability to reject this. I don't think that's the case. We could surely reject this, and then it goes back to land court, and it will run its course. So I think that surely is an option for this board. Although, as I said before, I'm not of that opinion. Back to the utilities, I would also just say, besides the utilities or the mechanical equipment that the applicant can handle, I would just like to be sure that we also don't find that the electric company but doesn't put a transformer somewhere where it's apparent. I mean, it's easily viewed by everyone, as well as the gas metering, something where you see it in the street, that it's not in keeping with the rest of the architecture of the facility. I do think the parking, I do remember the transportation, he's going to say it's not a problem. And then, people may have their own opinion, but we're going to get a quote unquote expert says there's not an opinion. However, I could see the possibility of bank employees parking on the street. So I think we should probably put something in there that limits 2-hour parking on that street if that's already not in force. I think I may have a couple other points, Bonnie, but I think I really hit the highlights right now. So I'm good for the time being. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Don. Rick, I think it's you and
My turn, yes. Well, I actually purposely waited to hear what our new members, in particular our design professionals, had to say about this, because that's definitely not my strong point at all in terms of the design. So it was very important for me to hear that. This is a difficult one for me, and I have conflicting opinions about it. It's very important to me that the settlement agreement that was came out of mediation was supported by our chair and our planning director, the former city council president, the current city council president, especially thinking about the former city council president, who's so much involved in the development of the DoD. So I think that all of these things, all of these people are people who have concerns about urban design. So the fact that they are all recommending that we approve this plan is important. Also, the fact that 7 out of the city councilors wanted us, took the special step of reversing the previous city council's decision and bringing it back to us. That's important to me too. Something that bothers me though, and that I'm still struggling with as I say these words, is that so much of the discussion has been about appearance and about aesthetics, about materials, detailed design, and not about the item that our decision was based on last year. Our decision said very little, if anything, about design and aesthetics. It was all about scale, size, and massing. So the changes that are reflected in the settlement agreement don't address the decision that we made last year. So we would have to, and it's good that we have a full new board, because those people don't have to think about changing their minds. I have to think about changing my mind in order to vote in favor of this. And as I say, the settlement agreement doesn't speak to our decision last year. It talks about things that might be done to soften the appearance of the structure. rather than the issue of scale and massing. That said, the sidewalk today was very helpful because I tried to imagine, as I was out there, what, for example, two houses on that site might look like, and to the extent to which they might have a similar impact on the abutters on the opposite side of Prospect Street, on the abutters in Otis Place, and I could actually see as an alternative that constructing buildings that were similar in design to those that exist in the neighborhood could have a similar visual effect. So I guess when I look at this view, looking down the street, that gives me a very different perspective than the aerial view. The aerial view really emphasizes the massing of this project. It looks like something that was dropped in from a helicopter out of the site with no relation to what's around it. But when you get down to the street view, you lose some of that impact. For example, this one actually begins to feel to me more in keeping with the scale of the neighborhood. So I'm not sure where I am right now, but I have a much more nuanced view of the development than I might have had last year. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, I'm going to surprise everybody because I'm going to say that just because I was part of the settlement agreement and had to agree to something to get it back here, doesn't mean that I supported it, and I don't. I am still where I was when we made the previous decision for all the same reasons. I don't think the ordinance speaks to appearance and aesthetics as an alternative to looking at the actual numbers, as Jamie has pointed out, and others, where the heights are in relationship, the proposed heights in relationship to the existing building. And looking at on the site walk today, it was very clear again that there are three different heights, at least three, on the 1870 building. And I've always talked about looking down, if you stand a little farther back from this image up on State Street, looking down Prospect Street, a terrible example, because I agree with Rick, it looks much better. It's easier to see from the street level what we're talking about. But I call them the wings that stick out on the 1870 building. Yes, that's a view. And looking at that down to the eave line and of the proposed structure, the structure is definitely not subordinate. And I don't believe that that distance, for me anyway, works to allow the distance that's required for that structure to fit on the site effectively, according to the standard, the Secretary of the Interior standards and the DOD criteria with the existing historic buildings. So I would not support the application today either. I know what the implications of that are, but it doesn't look like I have to play them out or talk them through because I'm probably in the minority. But I take my responsibility as a planning board member very seriously. And I understand that we have under the DOD, we have a responsibility to protect the historic character of the downtown. And in this particular situation, we are looking at an abutting neighborhood that is very different, as has been pointed out by my colleagues, from the commercial district in which the applicant's buildings sits and would sit with the new addition. And I know that we have to consider, I've said this before, but I still make notes and have to refer to them again. that we need to work collaboratively with the applicants to reach a compromise that respects the needs of the applicant, the well-being of the abutters, and the interests of the city as reflected in the master plan. And I just don't believe that the settlement agreement proposal design makes enough substantive change to allow me to support it. So I don't.
If we just not have, nothing we want to have comments, because we're in the middle of deliberation.
Yeah, I think we should talk to each other. So I don't know if, as you pointed out, clearly, your impression or your understanding was that because, I'll just say it personally, I was part of the settlement agreement, that by definition, I supported it and would support it. I would support it on remand just to get it back here, but you interpret that to mean that I would support a decision by the planning board in favor of this application. And if that changes anything, the way you're thinking or anyone else, I didn't hear it as clearly from the others as I heard it from you. So I think we probably should discuss it.
And I think that's very helpful. And I guess I have the feeling also, maybe I'm wrong about this, that 7 members of the city council would like us to approve it. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know why there was such a big push to get it back to us if they didn't want a different decision.
I think there was it's very hard to hear the recording. I was listening to it from home or to hear from on Zoom because the microphone was focused in one direction. And for example, when Attorney Lane was answering questions to Councilor Khan, he turned his head to talk to her and I lost half of what he said. And the same with Attorney Costa. So I think whoever else was speaking, thank you. So I'm not sure that they understood the distinction between remanding it to the planning board for us to make a decision and their vote, meaning that they supported the proposal. And if it were made that clear, I really wish I'd been in, I don't know if I could have spoken at the time, but that I would have really just said it in plain English. That was the distinction on which they had to understand when they were taking their vote. So I don't know if 7 of them supported the settlement.
And I wonder how much of it was driven by the fear that the downtown overlay district would be thrown out. Because my understanding, is if we don't approve it, then it goes back to the judge who has, as I've heard it, indicated a tendency toward dealing with downtown overlay district and maybe not even having to deal with the underlying the issues of massing from that point of view. And if we were to approve it and then we were appealed by somebody else, we might get a better shot of it in a less adverse judge. So I mean, I think that's one of that may be part of the situation, trying to preserve the downtown overlay district. I don't know how much of that is true.
Well, I'm glad that this didn't come up until now because I really wanted us to do exactly what we did, which was focus on the application, specifically around the DOD and as relevant the site plan review criteria. And to leave all of those other extenuating but very serious implications of our decision out of the picture. Because that's what I wanted to add to why add to what I'm saying about the possibility of a denial. It would go back to court. The judge has given an indication that he would rule on the DOD before he would rule on the application, because obviously if he found the DOD invalid, there would be no point in considering the decision. And if that were the case, everything would be thrown out and the applicant could build whatever they wanted to with the underlying zoning And we've seen on the chart what that allows, 40 feet, no setbacks, et cetera. Not to say that they would, but they could. And then, of course, going forward, we have to find another way to protect the historic nature of the downtown. So yeah, that's what would happen, that could happen, sorry. That's the worst case scenario of what could happen if we were to deny this proposal.
So getting back to the kind of that underlying issue of massing and scale. Obviously, if we vote to approve the application, then we need to have a different description of the reasons for approving it than our reasons for denying it the last time around. And I'd actually be interested, because you guys are more knowledgeable about this than I am, you know, how you look at ideas of massing and scale on this proposed.
On this particular site that I was talking before about the proportion of the street, that's one component of, you know, a sense of scale. What does the street wall feel like? And with this proposal, the street wall is of similar height on both sides of the street. The street is 40+ feet wide, building face to building face. So there's not a terrible proportion working. The roof slopes help tremendously, I think, in terms of getting daylight down into the street. So I think all of those things are working in favor. I keep going back to parking, and you know, if the bank has programmatic requirements related to the office component of this project that are dictating the amount of square footage that is at the second floor, what's driving the massing of this building is the parking. Just that you've got 15 feet floor to floor for mechanized parking in there. I commend the architects for finding a way to pack 62 cars into the smallest possible volume. But the reality is that is what is creating the height of the building. It's what's creating some of the bulk of the building. And when I hear that there was earlier discussions about perhaps off-site parking that could have relieved some of that, I wish I was part of those discussions early on, because the impact of parking all of those cars on this site, whether or not you have a mechanized parking solution, is enormous. And to me, that's what's driving a lot of what people are concerned about with this. And it could be mitigated tremendously if you could push some of that parking somewhere. And it may be way too late to have that discussion, probably is, but that's I think the reality.
Yeah, just to back up on that, the background on it is the parking, if it were off-site, would overload the public parking in the neighborhood. That's a real simple, simplistic view of why it's rejected. But to your point, the programming required by the bank, and therefore its square footage, is in fact under the city ordinance around parking, driving the number of parking places.
I understand that, but I think you need to weigh the impacts on other public parking solutions against the impacts of this scale potentially on the neighborhood. And you got to balance those things a little bit. So there's a lot of massing here that is driven by the parking solution. And that's where this has ended up.
Yeah. Heather.
Can I ask a question about the parking? To you, somebody brought it up and there was a quick answer. And because I'm newer, I didn't know the history of it. But was it looked at to go underground more? And was there a significant problem to why the parking had to stay the way it is as opposed to something dug down?
Thank you. Lisa Mead, Television Costa, couldn't stand there any longer. So
We looked at going down further, and the fire chief said no. And there were also engineering problems with doing that as well.
Further discussion? Don or Richard, are you with us?
Yes, it's Don here. Yeah, just one comment again about the litigation. And if perhaps under the worst case scenario, the DOD was overthrown and brought back to the planning board and it was allowed by right. I just say it's by right under the underlying district. However, still a site plan review is needed. And I've had the privilege of rereading the site plan review, and it was very clear that a year or so ago, the planning board felt that the massing and the scale and several items violated the site plan review criteria. It was very clear, the decision the planning board made. So unless site plan review itself was overthrown as well, which I won't debate that point now. It still seems to me that this planning board or the community has protection if in fact the DOD was ruled invalid. Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments at this point? Yeah.
Just a question. So we have this remand application before us right now. It doesn't include many of the things that were in the full record from before. And I don't know how much of that is relevant, but how much, I guess, question for Attorney Lane is if we do not refer to anything from the prior, if we do not explicitly refer to anything from the prior review, is all that stuff completely irrelevant to, or is any of it incorporated by your inference?
Well, the nature itself, the remand application is what's been added, but it also includes the original application and the prior history. It's all before the board. That's all still before you all right now. And that's all part of this record. And it'll be part of the record that goes up to the court. So what's been added to the record in the remand application is what was described tonight. But the entire early history and application are still part of the record.
So would you say that representations made by the applicant during the prior process are still implicit in our?
They're still part of the record and they can be relied upon by the board, including the traffic study that was referred to and the other documentation that was presented. That's all part of the record that's before you right now.
Thank you. And then a question for Bonnie, I guess, or maybe Andy. Some people have raised some requests. I'm not sure they're formal requests for more information, but they've said they'd like to have more information, such as information about the louvers, information about some details of historic brick and so forth. Do we have the ability to make specific requests tonight to have those materials produced for us by the 22nd, if that's when we're continuing this to?
Well, my 2 cents on that would be that, yes, I think if you're conveying to the applicant tonight, and I guess the applicant has heard that if they could perhaps provide a little more detail on that material, that would be helpful, I assume, for the board, if you're continuing the matter and making the decision. I assume that the applicant has heard that. I guess the architect.
It would have to be obviously specific request.
So I think just to be clear about what you'd like, and I heard the Louvre, for instance, being mentioned, perhaps the architect of the team could speak a little bit, Rose, supplemental materials before if there's a continuing process, so that the board can take any new information like that into account. That level of detail isn't in the record already.
Andy, it's Richard. Can I ask a different question? If we approve in concept, can we continue to work with the applicant and the details as they get developed and be able to look at, again, the site mock-up that I was proposing and all that? They're still at an early stage, so a lot of these details are going to ferret out as they get into construction documents. And so I'm just wondering if that's a procedural way that we can have a way to move forward.
Yeah, I would say that's a little bit more difficult. So I think you really want to be clear about whatever it is you're approving in terms of the plans that are before you. Deferring details to a later point or expecting to review and approve them at a later point. You really have to work with what is in the record before you. So maybe the plans are modified or supplemented somehow. But I think you have to work with what's before you as opposed to trying to condition or assume that the applicant might flush out some more details with you as a board at a later point. I don't know if anybody else here wants to remain on that.
Actually, Andy, I wanted to just say, I agree with you there. I don't think we can actually ask the applicant to continue working with us after the 22nd. But I would like to flip that on the other side, and I would like to be sure that because this is such a sensitive site, that if we do vote to approve it, that approval will be limited to the site plan that's before us now, and that any revisions to the site plan. Because of that question that somebody raised about if National Grid, I think Don raised it, if National Grid wants to put a transformer somewhere that is not shown in the plan right now, that could have very serious impacts to the neighborhood. So I think that would be something that I would want to be very clear about in our approval.
Yeah, I understood. If I can just for the rest of the board members to understand, I think at the office, at least I'll speak to the office, we understand that this particular instance, given the sensitivity, if the board were to approve this project, that I think our assumption here is that your language in there, the decision will require that any changes come back to the board as a body to make sure that's understood. So
It wouldn't necessarily be a public hearing, it could be minor.
Sure.
But
it'd be subject to board.
I think what the two of you are talking about is language that is more than our standard language in that. So maybe a note to look for that.
I can't recall off the top of my head, but there was a recent decision last year or so maybe where there was a call like that, and I assume it carries the language that any change really would have to come back to the board.
Let's go back to the new information that was requested tonight. I saw some note taking. You guys are very good at this, Attorney Costa and Attorney Mead. So do you have a list of what you heard that we would like to have detailed?
Well, certainly, Madam Chair, I would, invite board members to confirm that I have it correctly. And the way that I always advise boards I represent to conclude meetings like this, if they're contemplating a conditional approval, is to give the applicant homework and a list of items that they expect to see for the next meeting. In this case, it's a bit unique because while there may be some new information we can submit, most of what I've heard referenced is not necessarily new information, something we need to create. It's something that probably already exists in the record, but you all don't have the benefit of having been part of the 12, 14-month process. Some of you do, but not all of you. So I do have a list that's sort of scattered throughout my notes here, but Mr. Coop had referred to concerns with respect to this parking scenario with queuing, and I referred to a traffic analysis we had done that's already in record, and we can find that, we can resubmit it, or we can ask for the assistance of the Office of Planning and Development to find it and provide it to Mr. Coop and to other members if they're interested in seeing it, to confirm that we've adequately addressed his concerns and other concerns relative to that particular issue. I've heard multiple members refer to mechanical systems where they'll be located. And I think that the statements I just heard are correct. I mean, it's always again, to use the same analogy I've already used previously tonight, it's always a balancing act when you're a permitting authority, because you're basing your permit or approval on concept plans that don't have that construction detail, but sometimes some of those construction details are relevant to your decision-making process and whether you're comfortable enough issuing that approval. So, but I think that there's a middle ground, and so Lisa and Chris were just saying to me that what was submitted during the public hearing process was a general list of materials throughout the proposed addition. They were more general than you might be looking for. They were a general reference, for example, to a granite being utilized in certain locations. Didn't necessarily specify the type of granite that would be used or the manufacturer of the granite that would be used. We haven't gotten that far yet in the plans. Not like we have the information, we're holding it back from the board. We're just not there yet. So I think that we can resubmit or provide you with a copy of that list. And if there is some additional detail that we can commit to now as part of a conditional approval, we will do our best to try to meet the board halfway without committing to details that we don't know the answers to. Certainly, I've seen conditions of approval that were required to notify boards in a community, in a city like Newburyport, where we've got a significant Office of Planning and Development staff. We can submit to staff that information for their review and confirmation that it's consistent with what's in the decision prior to commencing construction. I've seen that sort of a condition on other approvals in Newburyport before as well. But requiring construction level detail at this stage, we're just not there yet. But I appreciate in the same vein that, what was said before, we've represented through not just tonight's hearing, but previous public hearings on this project, that the mechanical systems are going to be as shown on the plans, that we are doing what we can, with the exception of those that are shown in the exterior of the roof, to move those inside the sloped roofs. If anything is shown beyond what's shown in the plans, that's a plan change that requires approval from the board. That's a standard condition that you often approve, that anything with that substantiality would have to come back before the board, and we would understand that. Let me look up through my other notes here. I heard the comment about Mr. Yeager commented on a site mock-up of some sort should be a requirement because the details will make or break the project. And so I guess I would need greater detail as to what is contemplated by a site mock-up. If that's something that I don't imagine that can be accomplished in the next few weeks, but that's something that maybe could be accomplished as part of that process I just described, where it's submitted and approved for consistency with your decision by office staff before a building permit issues. What else have I seen here? If I'm missing something, feel free to speak up.
I think just to address the mock-up, I think what Mr. Yates is referring to is, just an example is what the city of Boston, or probably the city of Cambridge, required is a site mock-up showing the actual materials to be used, showing the relationship of materials, typical details. That's something that doesn't happen until construction starts, but there's a progressive process that starts with submitting the actual material, indicating how those will be used in the building, and eventually getting to that mock-up so that there can be an understanding of how all of those pieces come together and relate to each other. So I think that's the process that he's describing. I don't think we would get to the mock-up immediately, but we'd certainly like to see the materials specifically, and enough of a sense of the details, where the intent is relative to detailing the project, that we would be comfortable with moving forward in that process, but eventually see that in mock-up form on the site.
Well, we certainly understand the request. It's something we've not done in the city before with other projects. I recognize that this is an important project on a critical site. So we'll have those discussions, and we'll try to produce whatever we can produce as part of this project process. And then as the project develops, we can talk about, or you can talk about what an appropriate conditional approval might look like, if that is what results, that would require additional information later in the process.
Mr. Coop did interpret my comments accurately in terms of the conditions of wanting to see a site mock-up. And large building projects, it's pretty common that the contractor does provide said mock-up and be able to look at the assignment.
I was having it whispered to me that, that is large project is a term that was just used, and I had it said to me, projects typically 100,000 square feet and larger, this is routine. Not to say it can't be accomplished with smaller projects, but this is obviously not a project of that size, but I appreciate the concerns of board members. So
I think we should consider that for some version of a condition as a sort of ongoing project, evolution through as a way to see the details as they evolve. But we have never done that either, so we'll be also playing the language for that. It would be appropriate for the decision. But if you can bring us anything on materials that we maybe have seen in the past, you can actually bring them in, or something that's realistic in an illustration. I think that would help give comfort to those who are concerned about that.
Understood. We'll find what we submitted before and we'll see how we can improve upon it between now and your next meeting.
So the only new thing on this list is the questions about the mechanical systems and, oh, and the spandrel glass. Yeah. As an alternative to that.
I'm actually glad that came back up because I was thinking about Mr. Coop's comments there with the pushing the facade out, which was, to my understanding, was a recent change. That would seem to provide more width in which to do something there. Because I do worry about the spandrel glass being very harsh in its appearance without some sort of definition and relief in the facade. So it is one of the details I'm most concerned about.
It's geometrically doable on Prospect Street, but because that's where we were asked to pull that facade out. It's not as easy around every window that would surround the garage. So I think that would be a discussion of where's the best value for that detail. If Prospect Street is it, if Otis Street is it, it's possible, but it because of the dimensional constraints of actually how the way that the machinery works inside for the parking. I think that'll be challenged in other places in the facade.
I see. So your prior concern was really because you envisioned us asking for that all the way around the building, but.
Well, I'm trying to design in my head as I'm hearing this discussion. Yeah, yes, you're right. There is room on Prospect Street because we pulled that facade out to accommodate the setback in the middle. But the previous pressures of this process has been to shrink this footprint as small as possible, which in other places around the building does not allow room for a shadow box type detail. Having said that, we haven't done even design development on this project. So there may be room to do it, but we have to, what does that mean? It's 2 inches behind the glass, 4 inches behind the glass, there are different ways of doing your shadow box. All that will have to be looked at through the design development.
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, just for the record, this was, just pull up on the screen, this was from some years ago, but the One Boston Way project, when the planning board was looking at this for the One Boston Way site, the applicant had worked with the architect, you can see from the photo, had brought in a mock-up, just by comparison, just for your discussion. This was a mock-up to show some of the materials being used there and the, core relationship between them. It didn't cover everything like windows, of course, but this was an example used there.
That's exactly what I was referring to, because now you got a feel for the quality of the brick, the color of the mortar, the width of the mortar joints, its relationship, in this case, to spandrel glass. I mean, it's just a perfect opportunity to see the actual assemblies.
Heather.
In this conversation of the shadow box, how it could be viable to go on Prospect Street, but then you're saying to wrap it may be a different consideration. With the setbacks on Otis Place, because of that garden area, wouldn't it be easier to just improve that square footage by that number of inches?
Sure, but again,
I know.
We have been pushed for a year and a half now to make this building as small as possible. Now to be asked to pull it out again.
Right.
Yes, and the answer is yes. Once we get to design development of the building, maybe it's a couple inches, maybe it's 4 inches.
I think we're talking about inches.
I know, but we've been challenged on inches for 2 years.
And I have also heard that the real issue is along Prospect Street, because that is most visible from the street. When you talk about Otis Place, there's the pocket park there, it's pushed back. It doesn't seem to me anyway, I'm just kind of reflecting what I've heard people say. But
consistency is important.
Yeah, okay, so when you walk around that corner, you want it to.
I think anyone who walks by a building and sees an inconsistency will think of it as being less quality.
Right, okay.
So I think we either choose to be consistent with the detail that works, or we have to relook at does this building have to grow to allow for that kind of detail? What's the value of all of that?
Well, we only have one more meeting.
I don't think we want
We
to
can't
talk
get
at all
into
about the
these
footprint.
details.
I can't imagine the building needs to grow to accommodate this.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the fact that
We just can't I'm sorry, we can't redesign this in one meeting and we can't, extend the date for a decision. So we're gonna have to find language that works in a decision, if it is approved, that would allow this development to take place. Maybe something to do with, I don't know if this fits with construction plans or something as Attorney Costa talked about prior to a building permit and having it be reviewed by staff. Those are our standard operating procedures in other situations. If we come up with something a little more creative, fine, but we need to have in this decision by the end of the next meeting that we vote on everything that we feel comfortable with going forward.
Well, I do have a question about that, just from a process point of view. So it's going to be different than what we normally do. Normally, we vote on something and then look at the language, make sure we're comfortable with it. In this case, we may be drafting language on the 22nd. Is that right?
Well, we're gonna hopefully have 98% of it done before we get here. If more conversation, I'm just telling board members, if more concerns come up or you want more detail in it, you may have to give it up in lieu of getting a decision that we can agree to. And in that case, we would be adding language, but we will not vote on it until it's clear.
And my understanding is that the applicant cannot, or would rather not, come to our regular meeting on the 15th. They want to postpone until the 22nd. So we don't have that opportunity to kind of work through that. So
It depends on whether they could produce some of the details we're talking about by the 15th and more.
So, Madam Chair, the issue with the 15th is that we were unavailable on
Oh,
the
that's
15th.
right, I totally.
Which is why we chose the 22nd. We would have liked to finish the process sooner. We asked to postpone it by a week because we weren't available on the 15th.
Right.
That's the only reason why we're meeting.
So they can't come on the 15th for any reason. So that's why we have a special meeting on the 22nd, tentatively scheduled. And that's it. Do or die that night. So yes, the answer to your question is we could be crafting language that goes into the decision on the same night that we take the vote.
could members, individual members, not discussing among themselves, submit ideas for language to Andy between now and the 22nd, so we have something to review on the 22nd?
Yes, yes. So that's a request that I support, that individual members of the board can send language that you'd like to see incorporated into the decision based on your concerns tonight and how you would like to see that managed. But send it only to Andy and he will work that into the draft decision, which has to be available for us to see at least, 48 hours before the meeting.
We assume before that.
I hope, normally it's a week, you just heard me make a really different decision.
I mean, ideally, it'd be nice for Andy to be able to send it out the Friday before, so we can.
The Friday before will be, is our latest date that we've ever had. And I just gave him some.
And I guess I would just, for everybody who's new, emphasize that any conditions we have pretty much have to reflect the fact that we're going to be done with this project as a planning board, and we're not going to be seeing it again after the 22nd, correct?
That's correct.
So none of these conditions can say you're going to come back to us with this and this and this during the construction process. We're making things that you, that's why I was so concerned about making sure that we say we're tying this to a specific site plan, because there's nothing, the only way it can come back to us is if the applicant wants to change something.
Do members have any And so, did we just die up there?
I'm not sure whether it's time to or.
Past your time.
Yeah. I'll try to get back on. I'm not sure.
Because I need their votes to go to the.
Well, they're still here. The apologies, it's actually you in the room that won't be able to see it, but they can still see.
Okay, so they can participate in a vote
Yeah.
to continue this meeting to,
Or something. I don't know.
okay. Are we ready for a continuance motion
I would like to move to continue the meeting to the 22nd.
to the 22nd? That's Rick. And who seconds the motion? And Bob seconds it.
I'm sorry, if I could just for the record, is that clear that here at 7 PM at the senior center? Right?
Yes.
Yep. Let me call roll. Please, could we have silence in the room while we finish our meeting? Al Holden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes,
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Okay, we'll continue to the 22nd of June. Do you have some final words?
No, just wanted to say thank you and appreciate the accommodation.
Thank you for your time tonight and for your participation. All right, we have a couple more items on our agenda. No meeting minutes, because our note taker has not been well and she will get to us for the next meeting. Any updates, Andy?
I should say actually that Jennifer and I have been talking about the diet student zoning. Some things.
Hello, we're still having a meeting. Could you carry your conversations outside? Thank you.
Jennifer Blushing, as well as I have been discussing various different places in the zoning where some language might be helpful. So we'd like to bring some forward, some of those pieces forward, working with you. Obviously, we'll go with the chair and the vice chair first to kind of, reinsert generic pieces of the board five, but working with you and with counselors to sponsor some things that do house to be cleanup type things for us. While we also continue to have discussions about the other substantive things, that we always do. So we'll circle back on that. I don't want to.
Any timeline for when?
Probably about a month out from now. I recognize that with the council and zoning session, budget hearings and the short-term monthly units piece coming back on the 15th, we're kind of assuming the bandwidth might be picking up.
Can I add to that, the request from the planning board that we draft an ordinance that will reduce our numbers from 9 to
Yes.
7
Yes.
with 2 alternates?
Yes.
All right, we are not going to consider any of your other housekeeping ordinance amendments until we have that in the package.
Duly noted.
Okay,
Duly
good.
noted. Okay.
All right, I thought I just used a little bit of leverage.
Understood.
Speaking of short-term rentals, so that's coming back for a joint public hearing on the 15th. I think I've mentioned this before, that I'm not worried this time around, that we're seeing it first in joint public hearing and not among ourselves, because we've discussed it forever. And so whatever the council has decided they want to incorporate into this version, we'll obviously see it in advance, but we will discuss it as a board in the joint public hearing.
There's not much more to say.
No, there is.
It's said over and over again.
Yeah, and what we see maybe, I don't know what it's gonna be. I'm not even gonna say. So, yeah, we've had that enough of those.
Our hope is that a more recent version will be distributed, or possibly multiple versions, maybe. Hopefully not, but distributed before the public hearing on the 15th, because the last version we have is from the council's committee discussion.
Well, isn't that required? I mean, they supposedly wrote one over the weekend, which I never saw. I was supposed to review it.
Yeah, I have, if I was able to distribute to you yet, I would send it out. I have not yet seen a version that is, hopefully a little further along in terms of consensus where the parameters are, but we have posted, and it's available already with that posting for the meeting, the most recent version that came out of the council's committee discussion. So it has tweaks that were discussed, or, without necessarily having a full vote, it was sort of a straw poll vote of consensus there. We had to massage the language a little bit based on what the council was discussing at the time in order to fit what they were asking for, because they didn't have clear, motions on the floor for the edits, but we translated that, and so that's in that 5, I forget what date is it, 5/20 or whatever, I don't know where it is, it's 5/2, I think, May 2nd.
Is that the one that's gonna come to the public hearing?
No, I'm assuming there'll be a more recent one than the one that is posted now.
Okay.
That will be forthcoming from counselors as a potential, workable piece beyond that, but
That's why it's been reposted, because it's meant to be a new version. So they can't just keep tweaking the old one. Or they tweak the old one in such a way that it's new enough that they have to repost it.
Is it going to be, and you may not know this yet, but is it going to be a red line version with showing all the changes we had, or is it gonna be a new version?
My assumption is that it's a red line version of what's a markup version.
It'll be total.
I'm sorry to say, yes,
Three
another
multiple
markup
colors?
version. Yeah, we've had so many different iterations. That's one of my concerns with short-term rentals. It's just the number of iterations that we've gone through. We've actually noticed during some of the meetings that we've actually, such as was captured or carried over in between versions. So really important, I think, to come to agreement on, essence first, and then work with the language from there rather than the other way around, because it's easier to come to some agreement on whatever the parameters might be and refine the language from there. So.
May I ask, if we're ready to move on to another topic, it's a quick one, just another topic. May I ask what we're thinking about in terms of another workshop on Waterfront West, just so I can plan accordingly? I'm not advocating for any timeline, but I'm curious when you think we might workshop that again.
I was gonna put it on the agenda for the 15th.
Oh, okay.
Yes. I have a note tomorrow morning to remind the people who put together the agenda to add it to it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
so it'll be under discussion, the discussion section. So we can call that sort of a workshop.
Okay.
But it will be part of the regular meeting.
So one of the things, just maybe it's worth saying out loud to see if everyone agrees or has any input, but I plan to show the live SketchUp model this time, so you can actually move around in it, not just, still images. And also the two prior proposals, as a massing, again, there that can be turned on and off, so you can see those and respond to those, and we can push pull a little bit live, not a ton. But does that sound like an appropriate approach?
Yeah, and
or-
I just wanted to ask if it's not too soon to start looking at some of the design details. And I was gonna ask you to consider that and maybe walk me through some of that stuff before that.
Let's talk.
Okay, so two of us will talk about that, because we're not a subcommittee, we're a whatever, unofficial too soon.
With full deference to the chair and the board, I still want to take it on the 15th. I just know obviously the short-term rentals, I don't know how much time that would take. You may want to bring your laptop and use the remote connection, but have everything on mute, so that you can actually tie in. Otherwise, we might have an issue with displaying the room.
So I'm right here logging into Zoom as if I was somewhere else.
Just silent.
That would
Yeah,
work fine.
That way
So he can.
he can do what he has to do, but we can still show on the screen and all that stuff. Okay. Because the meeting is physically here in person, but we're still trying to make sure that if there's a board member who's remote, they can patch in while we deal with this technological issue where we didn't want to obviously run into an issue tonight during a complicated hearing with people not being able to hear each other remotely and have that be 100 people that had the problem. So it's here in person. That's my next.
That works great.
I didn't look at the agenda for the 15th. Is it only short-term rentals?
Oh,
wait a minute, we've carried
No,
something
you
over.
carried
Is it
the
decision
6C application.
that is supposed to be slam dunk, right?
Supposed to be, my understanding, you can take that first and do it quickly, given where you left off at the hearing last time.
Okay, so that might take us 15 or 20 minutes, and then we can do Waterfront West. Well, short-term rentals will take as much time as people want to talk about it.
We could keep our mouths shut.
We can keep our mouths shut, absolutely. I won't.
I don't have anything more to say about it.
Yeah, yeah. no.
It may come down to more debate from others at that point. I mean, there's 3 members of the planning and zoning committee, but 11 members of the city council, so it may come down to more debate there.
Let them fight it out.
Plus, there's gonna be public input, so,
Yeah.
it could be 2 hours. Just to warn you. I want to thank everybody for tonight. I know it wasn't easy. And Tom in particular for sitting through all this. It was the confidence you gave us for just being. Thank you. Anything else, board members?
Do we need 10 minutes?
No minutes.
There was gonna say, 'cause I-
No minutes. Next meeting, there'll be 3 sets, right? All right, then I guess I can take a motion to adjourn.
We'll move to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Good night, dog. Good night.
Yeah.
All right.
For you.